We are going to get started. Ed Pinto, Senior Fellow, Co-founder and Co-Director of the AI Housing Center, and happy to welcome you along with the co-sponsor, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and Mackenzie Hoover will welcome you in a moment. And we're happy to have you here, and we're happy to have the online participants. For the online participants, you can use the Q&A feature to ask questions, and we'll be monitoring that. And then the live participants will be asking for questions, and please wait for the mic when we get to that point. We'll have people walking around with mics, and you can be recognized. The one thing we ask is that you ask a question. It's not an opportunity to do a 5-minute monologue. It's an opportunity to ask a question of the panelists. We've been working on what we have dubbed Homesteading 2.0 for some time. It actually grew out of an effort that Senator Lee undertook with the Houses Act back about 4 or 5 years ago. And a colleague here, Kevin Corinth, was the chief economist at the Senate Joint Economics Committee under Senator Lee's direction. And they put together an analysis of Bureau of Land Management land back, as I said, 4 years ago or so. And we've been studying land for a long time here at the Housing Center. And we've also been studying house prices and the need for more supply. And we noticed what I've been calling the California blast zone. And the California blast zone starts in California and spreads all the way to the east to a line that roughly runs from Austin north through Denver to the Canadian border, and then up the coast to include Oregon and Washington. It also, to some extent, includes Hawaii, but that's sort of more of a two-way street. And that blast zone has driven house prices up in the western third of the country and has also fueled a lot of growth in the western third of the country as people move out of California to other states that happen to be, by and large, the states we'll be talking about today, the 10 Bureau of Land Management states in the lower 48. So we started looking at this topic more intensively a number of months ago and been working on it over that time period. And today is the initial result of that research. And so we really are excited about releasing this work. We'll be releasing some maps and some other data that will help illuminate this topic. And as you'll see, the Homesteading 2.0 has two components, a home sweet home component, which is basically build more subdivisions and housing near existing population areas, and then a Freedom City component or new Freedom City component that we'll also be talking about. With that, I will turn it over to Mackenzie Hoover from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce.
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, I'm pleased to welcome you to today's event co-hosted with the AEI Housing Center. We are here to address a significant challenge impacting communities and economies across the U.S., especially in the West, increasing home prices that are slowing economic growth and making home ownership increasingly difficult to attain. Housing has long been a cornerstone of the American dream and a vital component of our nation's economy. Yet, the U.S. housing market is in crisis, driven by a fundamental imbalance between supply and demand. The impact of this housing shortage extends beyond home buyers and renters, affecting the broader economy by reducing consumer spending, increasing employee turnover, and hindering businesses' abilities to attract and retain talent. Addressing this shortage is essential for stabilizing the market and supporting long-term economic resilience. Today, we are here to explore a promising solution, the Homesteading 2.0 proposal. By unlocking just 0.3% of Bureau of Land Management land, we have the potential to build 3 million homes over the next 10 years, significantly closing the housing supply gap and lowering the cost of housing. Throughout the day, we'll delve into key policy aspects and proposals of Homesteading 2.0, which Ed mentioned, examining how this initiative can bring economic growth and affordability to the West. We will also explore the concept of developing freedom cities and the benefits they can offer in terms of housing supply and economic development. I would like to extend my gratitude to our distinguished panelists and speakers for sharing their insights and expertise with us today. And we have many joining online as well. So I encourage you to actively participate in the discussion by submitting questions through the Q&A. Thank you all for joining us in this important conversation. Together, we can work towards solutions that expand housing supply, lower the cost of homes, and ensure a prosperous future for all. So let's get started.
One second. Here we go. Okay. So if we could bring the first slide up, please. Excuse me? Yes, I do. Thank you. So as I said, we've been working on this for some time, and it really was based on research that was done by the Senator Lee when he was chairman of the Joint Senate Economic Committee. And that really was the impetus for this work. And as I said, we've done work on land prices. It's when house prices go up, it's not generally because the structure value is going up. The structure value is actually a depreciating cost. And the price of houses isn't set by the price of new houses. It's set by the price of existing houses. Why is that? Well, existing houses outnumber new homes by traditionally 9-to-1, but today it's more like 8-to-1, 7-to-1. But the vast majority of houses that sell are existing homes, and that really is the market. And if you can buy an existing home at a price, with some depreciation, with some lack of lesser amenities or up-to-date things, versus a new home, at some point, that new home can price itself out of the market relative to the existing market, and people shift towards the other alternative, just like you shift from beef to chicken, or I don't know what the substitute for eggs is these days, but you shift from one item to another. That's the way markets work. And so when you when you make land very expensive, which we've done largely in this country through zoning, and that was a conscious decision that was made over 100 years ago by the federal government when it pushed the exclusionary zoning structure that we have today, which limited large swaths, 75% of residential land, to exclusively single-family detached. That was done for a purpose. It was done to drive up the price of housing. It sounds crazy today, but that was the actual purpose. Why did they want to do that? It was called economic zoning. You couldn't discriminate against blacks and ethnic minorities like Southern Italians and Eastern Europeans and Jews of the lower order from Russia, as they were called. You couldn't do that discrimination technically legally under the Constitution, but you could exercise economic discrimination by making the housing more expensive and by limiting to single-family detached, and then having things like side lots, side setbacks, front setbacks, back setbacks, minimum lot size, minimum house size. You just could keep driving up the price of the house to the point where you could almost, like turning a dial, decide who could live there. And if you turn the dial price-wise up enough, you basically made sure that the people who didn't want living there couldn't afford it. And that started in 1922 and has continued largely to this day. And we've been championing the concept of light touch density for a number of years now, which basically reverses that process and says, let's go back to where we were back before the federal government got involved in this and created this exclusionary zoning structure. And ironically, we're about the only country in the world that does it this way. Many countries, they have zoning, but they will define mass or volume or size. Basically, is it compatible with other things in the neighborhood? So you can have a single family detached, you can have townhomes, you can have duplexes, you can have ADUs, you can have a small grocery store, you can have a doctor's office. These were all normal things back in the early part of the 20th century. Those were all made illegal, but for single family detached. The problem is that also ended up creating a bias against what's now known as multifamily housing. So if you start with the premise that zoning, single-family detached is a category, everything else got thrown into multifamily: a duplex, a triplex, a quadruplex, a 100-unit apartment building, a townhome. They're all called multifamily, and they're all excluded from single-family detached. But if you look at the federal definition of financing, it's single-family 1 to 4. Well, what's single-family 1 to 4? Well, it's single-family detached, it's single-family attached or townhomes, it's condominium buildings. It could have 10 units, it could have 100 units, it could have 1,000 units, it could have 2 units. It's duplexes, triplexes, quadruplexes, townhomes. All of those are single-family 1 to 4 and qualify for single-family 1 to 4 financing. What's multifamily? Multifamily is 5+, excluding all of those things I mentioned. That's very different. It's from the zoning structure. And so again, Homesteading 2.0 is the opportunity to make housing affordable again by really focusing on the construction of starter homes. What got made illegal was largely the starter home. Smaller homes on smaller lots, that disappeared. Duplexes, triplexes, quadruplexes disappeared in single-family neighborhoods. Townhomes disappeared. ADUs disappeared. These are all the things that disappeared from the single-family detached neighborhoods that we're trying to bring back through light touch density. And Homesteading 2.0, by starting with new subdivisions in new cities, is an opportunity to, in effect, undo the wrongs that the federal government and then policymakers through state and local government implemented, again, over the last 100 years. So Homesteading 2.0 has the potential to be one of the biggest federal housing initiatives since President Lincoln's Homesteading Act of 1862. And many of you know my views on the federal government and its efforts to add housing supply. I often say the federal government is very good at adding demand. It is very poor at adding supply. The reason it's poor at adding supply is it tends to do things in a big way all at once. And the two examples that we have recently being the last 40, 50 years, is the 1968 Housing Act, which I see some people here that were at an event yesterday that was hosted by the home builders on housing supply, and one of the academics from George Washington University was waxing eloquent about the 1968 Housing Act. The only problem is books have been written about the aftermath of the 1968 Housing Act called Cities Destroyed for Cash, the Scandal at FHA, and how Detroit and Cleveland and Chicago were literally, the neighborhoods were destroyed by these programs that had loose money that went out and loose appraisal standards and all kinds of things that were implemented in the 1968 Act and led to literally neighborhoods switching from white to black. There was a white flight, there's much written about that. That was all facilitated by this 1968 Act. The second opportunity we saw for that was after the affordable housing goals were put into the Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac charters in 1992 under the so-called Safety and Soundness Act. And what we know is within 16 years after that passage, Fannie and Freddie were in receivership, conservatorship, which they still are. And that led to an explosion of subprime lending that took place over the latter part of the mid to late 90s through the early aught years. And eventually the housing market collapsed, much like it collapsed after the early 1970s. And so those are two efforts by the federal government to add supply, but they added supply by using leverage. We're going to make a lot more people eligible by just adding leverage to the process. They didn't make housing more affordable. They made it affordable with subsidies and leverage. The Homesteading 2.0 is the complete opposite of that. It says, A, we're going to add supply, not with subsidies. This land is going to be sold at market rate. And yes, we have a proposal for having a lottery that would provide a small amount of benefit to first-time buyers who win a lot in a lottery. But we're not increasing the leverage of the buyers. We're not making housing more affordable through leverage. We're making it more affordable the old-fashioned way. Build smaller houses on smaller lots and the price goes down. And you'll hear a lot about that today. It's a very simple concept. And we've been researching this for a very long time. And we can demonstrate that builders don't rape and pillage based on building expensive houses. There's a complaint. Oh, builders only build large homes. They don't build large homes because they want to. They actually make less money building a home on a 1-acre lot if they could build, let's say they have a subdivision with 20 acres and they could build 20 homes on it. Forgetting the roads for a minute, but 20 1-acre lots. And they sell them for whatever. They would make much more money if they could build on 8 homes to an acre, or 5,000 square foot lots, or if they could build 25 townhomes to an acre. They would make more money on that because it's a higher and better use than 1 home per acre. Yet if the law says you can only build 1 home per acre, guess what builders do? They build 1 home per acre because that's what's legal. And the zoning gets in the way of the highest and best use of land. And so we have this opportunity because the Bureau of Land Management manages 266,000 square miles out in 10 states in the lower 48. That's the size roughly of Texas. And people say, well, that land is not close to anything, whatever. Well, we've looked at that, and the answer is there is sufficient land that's in appropriate spots, and you'll see a lot about that today. So we're proposing that the Bureau of Land Management sell off 850 square miles, a minuscule 0.3%, as McKinsey said, of the 267,000 square miles of BLM land in the lower 48. BLM also manages land in Alaska. They manage a lot of land in Alaska, but a couple square miles up there would be sufficient to build a lot of housing that more than meets the needs. So we've basically said, yeah, there is some land up there, but let's focus on the lower 48 because that's where the real housing needs are. We think you could add 3 million homes, about 1.5 million homes under the Home Sweet Home, which is let's build new subdivisions near existing settlements, cities, in metropolitan areas near existing development that are growing and need housing and need lower cost housing. And this lowers cost, as I said, in one way, it lowers cost because you're building on less land with smaller homes. They're still family sized, but smaller homes, they sell for less. But you then get a lot more homes at that price point. If, again, you're building at 1 home per acre, you only get, again, if you had 25 acres, some for roads, let's call it 20 homes are left, you get 20 homes. If you build townhomes on that, you might get 400 homes on that. Well, all of a sudden, you have 400, not 20, and the price of those 400 is much, much lower than the price of the 1-acre home. Well, that adds a lot of supply, so a lot more people who are wage earners can now afford those homes that are at that lower price point, which we'll see. And when you do that, they're moving from other places, and then you have what's known as filtering down occurs, which is what happens in the automobile industry when you build new cars. If you only built expensive new cars, the used cars prices go up. We saw that happen during the pandemic when it was difficult to build new cars. And so the price of used cars soared. And the same thing happens in housing. And so there's lots of different ways that what we call light touch density, which really means just smaller homes on smaller lots, leads to greater affordability without subsidies. So 1.5 million new homes over 10 to 20 years that are in new subdivisions. We've looked at what the capacity of an area is to absorb these new homes. We don't want to swamp an area. We found a place in Wyoming. You could build hundreds of thousands new homes, but the state of Wyoming only has 700,000 people. That means it only has 300,000 homes today. You can't add 300,000 or 400,000 homes to Wyoming and have it absorbed. So we look at what the absorption rate is, and we've identified that. We've also looked at that in terms of the Freedom Cities. The Freedom Cities are 1.5 million new homes in new cities. They don't exist today, but they're in metropolitan areas. And Arthur Gales will go through the selection criteria that we've created. We've studied the development of new cities around the world and around the United States. And we've learned from that study of what kind of criteria should one use when looking for these particular sites. But the Freedom Cities don't get built in 10 or 20 years. They get built in 40 to 50 years. You're talking from the ground up. You have to build not only housing, you need jobs, you need schools, you need parks, you need churches, you need restaurants, commercial, the whole works. You need everything. You're starting with nothing. And that all takes time. You need power plants, you need sewer plants, water plants, you need all of that infrastructure needs to be built, and that all takes time. Specifically, we're talking about reducing single-family detached lot sizes from about 7,600 square feet, which is roughly what we see in a place like Las Vegas, to about half of that, 3,800 square feet. And you may say, well, boy, that's a small lot. And we'll see a photo in a moment of a home that's on a 3,800 square foot lot, and it's a single-family detached home in Henderson, Nevada, part of the Las Vegas metropolitan area. And you'll see what that house looks like. And increasing townhome construction. There isn't a lot of townhome construction. It's growing around the country, but there needs to be a lot more because townhome construction really is the entry-level house of today. It was also the entry-level house back in the early 20th century, along with triple-deckers and duplexes. You could buy a triple-decker, live in one. Maybe you had family members that lived on the second floor, and then you'd rent out the third floor. And that was the way a lot of people got onto the housing ladder. Triple-deckers, which were ubiquitous in New England, were made illegal just across the board. Ironically, Cambridge, Massachusetts just made them legal again, just I think this year. What are the coveted types of housing in Cambridge and Somerville? Triple-deckers, built 120 years ago. And so same thing in Georgetown. What's the coveted type of house in Georgetown? The townhouse. What's the coveted house in Alexandria? The townhome. Those were built 200 years ago, 150 years ago, and today they're coveted. But nobody wants them in their neighborhood today, but they pay extra to be in one that was built 200 years ago. Doesn't make any sense. So if you have townhome construction, 1,800 square foot lots, there's 43,600 square feet in an acre. You can put 20, 25 townhomes. That's about normal for townhome construction. And you get a lot more homes. You get more than double the number of homes, and you get them at a lower price, which is what I said before. So the sale of 850 square miles would also generate, we estimate, $100 billion to the federal government, to the Treasury, by selling off this land. We're not proposing the land be given away, except again, we have a small amount of the 850 square miles that we have a lottery, much like the original Homesteading 1.0, as I'm dubbing it, from Abraham Lincoln's days. But the $100 billion is net of lottery sales. The lottery, the lot value is not tremendous. It may be, these are unfinished lots. This is raw land, so you basically, that's what the government has, and that's valued at $10,000 or $12,000 or $13,000. It depends on where the lot's located, but it's just a relatively small amount. But it is a symbol of going back to the original homestead concept. So the BLM has two mandates. The first being to promote thoughtful development in the right places to drive economic opportunities for local communities. That's very important. Its second has to do with all the other stuff. So think of it, they have this mandate for a couple of % of their land, and then they have another mandate having to do with recreation and energy and all kinds of other ranching, all kinds of other things having to do with the other 97 or 98% of the land. They haven't focused very much on this first mandate, maybe because it's only a couple % of the land. And we're only talking about selling off 0.3% of the 267,000 square miles. So the BLM Act of 1976 authorizes the Secretary of Interior to auction off land at market value directly to the private sector when disposal of such tract will serve important public objectives, including but not limited to expansion of communities and economic development. Well, what is economic development? Jobs. When you have jobs, what do you need? Housing. I mean, as night follows day, that's why we get into the problem. We add a lot of jobs, we don't add the housing. When you add the jobs and don't add the housing, you get higher home prices. And we measure that through something called median house price to median income. And the BLM land that we're talking about is located in 10 states: Nevada, Utah, Idaho, Wyoming, California, Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, Oregon, and Montana. 8 of those 10 states are 8 of the 12 most expensive states in the lower 48 based on median house price to median income. Why is that? They're in the California blast zone, as I mentioned. And they're also, I think 6 or 7 of them are the fastest growing states in the country: Utah, Nevada, Arizona, Colorado. These are very rapidly growing states. Yet they all have housing affordability and housing supply problems for the reasons I've mentioned. So with smaller home lots and sizes, the free market would be, again, able to add supply and build starter homes, making housing affordable. It's feasible to get this going by our next July 4th, or a year from now, 2026. This could be put in place, at least the first part of it, the Home Sweet Home. It'll take a little bit longer to do the Freedom Cities, but that could be announced. The initial part of that could be announced also on the same date. We're talking about these largely being, they're going to be for first-time home buyers, move-up buyers, primary owner occupants, U.S. citizens, and then the lottery would be for first-time buyers. So as I mentioned, there are 2 initiatives: the Home Sweet Home initiative, 250 square miles, divided equally between the first-time home buyer lots, and they wouldn't be necessarily segregated as this is the first-time home buyer section, but it would basically, the smaller lots, which naturally are going to be more affordable, would be dedicated to the lottery. So you'd have a subdivision, have a mixture of lots, and the smaller lots would be the ones that would be in the lottery. And the other lots would just be, for anyone who was eligible for the lottery. We've looked at land, and we've looked at land within existing city limits. We've looked at land within, say, 2 miles to 10 miles. We have a range. Why? Because in Las Vegas is very rapidly growing, and you actually could, over 10 years, expand into areas that are 10 miles away from existing development. Other areas that we found are either growing less or much smaller to begin with, or there's less land, and you can only add a 2-mile area, or it might be mostly within the existing city limits. So we've taken that into account also. The Freedom Cities are the bulk of the land. While you get the same number of houses, you also have to build an entire city. And so in our research, we found that about 60% of the land gets used for non-residential purposes, 40% gets used for residential purposes, but then you have the streets and the arteries and all the things that have to lead to those neighborhoods, and the neighborhoods may be near walkable areas that are being built from scratch and things like that. But the residential component ends up being about 30% of this 600 square miles, or about 180 square miles. And we're looking at Freedom Cities that might average, and again, this is just, this can vary quite a bit, maybe 30 square miles per city. Arthur will go through some cities we've identified in various states. We've said, well, since as you'll see, the land isn't evenly distributed near existing cities, it tends to be, as we'll see, in just a couple, 3 or 4 states, but the opportunity for Freedom Cities exists in all 10 states. And so we're looking at identifying 2 Freedom Cities per state, could be, it doesn't have to follow that, but we've said, well, let's just demonstrate the potential by identifying 2 Freedom Cities per state. The next slide shows where the Home Sweet Home land is. And you can see the estimated homes built over a 10-year horizon and a 20-year horizon. Again, the 20-year horizon, some places the numbers are the same because they don't have an ability to absorb anymore, or there's no more land. But other places like Nevada have the ability to absorb more. Actually, Nevada has the ability to absorb a 20 to 30-year horizon because there's so much land, as we'll see in the Las Vegas and Reno metropolitan areas. But you see that the land, the opportunity is in Nevada, 634,000 homes over 10 years, Arizona, 500,000 homes, New Mexico, 271,000 homes, and California, 136,000 homes. And then it trails off from there. The Idaho doesn't have that much land, and so doesn't have that much opportunity. Colorado, rapidly growing state, but not much land, so not much opportunity. And again, we're talking developable land, meaning it has the right slope and all the other conditions necessary to develop residential subdivisions. And Wyoming has quite a bit of land, but as I mentioned, it can only absorb so much. So that's how we went about this part. There are a number of misconceptions. We're talking about what I call Smokey the Bear land. We are not. We're not talking national parks. We're not talking national forests. We're not talking military bases. We're talking basically undesignated BLM land that some of it may be designated as conservation areas, some of it may be ranch land. But again, we've identified a minuscule amount, 850 square miles, about 0.3% to use for the Home Sweet Home, and then we've identified another 600 square miles that could be used for the Freedom Cities. And the BLM Act itself provides sufficient latitude for periodic adjustments in use to conform to changing needs and conditions. It was not designed by Congress to be frozen. So even conservation areas, which are just generalized conservation areas, not because there anything specific, ecological, criticality to that land, it's just they put it aside for conservation areas. But as areas grow, you can re-designate some of that. And as we'll see, there's some large areas around Las Vegas that are conservation areas. And its mission is one of multiple uses. And again, those uses can change over time as metropolitan areas grow and as the economy grows and as the need for more housing grows. The land is not suitable for residential development. You hear that all the time. Well, again, are you going to go with anecdotes and opinions, or are you going to go with the facts? And again, we'll show you some maps, both for the Home Sweet Home initiative and for the Freedom Cities. Economic development is not a BLM mandate. Well, I've already said it is a BLM mandate, yet it's been one that's largely been ignored by BLM. Why is that? Well, part of it is just the bureaucracy, the way bureaucracies work, but I think there's another subtle thing here. The Bureau of Land Management, up until the 1976 Act, was called the Bureau of Land Sales. And when your title is the Bureau of Land Sales, what's your job? Selling land. When you change it to Bureau of Land Management, what's your job? Managing land. You don't think about selling it. Well, and that's pretty much what the BLM has done. They haven't thought much about selling it. It would take an act of Congress to sell BLM land. Well, the BLM Act already provides for the sale under the initiative of the Secretary of Interior at market value directly to the private sector. Now, we're suggesting that there be some congressional action under a reconciliation bill to be useful in removing some red tape. As we'll see, that was done under an act Congress passed for Southern Nevada in 1998, and we're suggesting that would be appropriate here. Would not be a major revenue producer. Well, it isn't a major revenue producer if you give the land away, but it is a major revenue producer if you sell the land to the highest bidder for residential development. So specifically, Freedom Cities provide a dynamic framework for reshoring critical industries, expanding housing affordability, facilitating rapid progress in emerging fields for biotechnology, aeronautics, energy. Again, you've got wide open spaces. You're building a new city from the ground up. These enclaves could provide innovators with space to experiment, demonstrate new technologies, and collaborate, boosting America's position in a rapidly evolving world. These newly established urban districts could have streamlined governance and targeted regulatory relief, and that would hold tremendous progress for accelerating innovation, strengthening our industrial base, and addressing some of our economic and technological challenges. They take longer to implement, as I mentioned. It takes a few years to build the infrastructure, a number of years, power substations, water and wastewater facilities, et cetera. Then you have to line up home builders and all the other construction that's going on. And then you eventually get to have people start moving in. But even that process occurs over the next 40 years. Think of Columbia, Maryland, and Reston, Virginia, and the Villages, Florida, and Sun City, Georgetown, Texas. These are all new cities that were started from the ground up in the last 50 or 60 years, some newer, some older. Or think Teravalis, Arizona, a new city of nearly 60 square miles of land in Maricopa County, Arizona. It's about an hour west of Phoenix. Plans are for 100,000 homes and over 50 million square feet of commercial development and all the other things that you need in a city. Over the next 50 plus years, it's being developed by Howard Hughes Holdings. And the infrastructure has been under construction for a number of years with power substation, water and wastewater facilities nearly complete. The home builders have been selected, and the first residents are expected to buy and move into homes before the year end. I mentioned the Southern Nevada Act from 1998. Why not follow that precedent? Well, it was passed in 1998. It authorized the sale of BLM land for residential purposes in Clark County, Nevada, which is Las Vegas, Henderson. The land auctions began under the 1998 Act pretty quickly, and they've averaged about 1 square mile a year. And they still have a long ways to go. It's been 27 years, and they're still working on it. When Congress passed the 1998 Act, they declared an emergency. They said, oh, Las Vegas is the fastest growing urban area in the United States, and they've taken so long to sell the land. What happened in the meantime? Las Vegas has the highest home price appreciation of any metropolitan area in the country. That's because they've been dragging their feet. It's a very cumbersome process that this act put in place. So we need to speed that up. And we need to actually sell off the land to the highest bidder and put the proceeds to the Treasury Department. So the common sense approach is to have the Secretary of Interior use existing authority and then provide some flexibilities through the reconciliation bill and through potentially some emergency powers that the president may have. And since there's $100 billion of revenue over 10 years, that makes it potentially eligible for a reconciliation bill, which means you have to have something in a positive budget perspective in order to proceed with a reconciliation provision. So the next slide is one of the maps you'll be seeing. This is Clark County, Nevada, showing how close BLM land is to existing residential development. The things that are purple are either in existing cities already or within contiguous to, within a mile of 50 single-family homes. And those single-family homes have at least, they're on lots that are no larger than a quarter acre. Why a quarter acre? Because that's indicative of city water and city sewer. You can't have private sewer on a quarter of an acre generally. And so if you're lots of smaller than that, you pretty much know you're near existing facilities. And so then we just have how many miles it is, as you see from the colors, and the yellows within the municipality, and then you march out. And again, the land that's light green wouldn't be sold at the beginning. Again, this is a 10-year to 20-year sale. You'd start with the red land, and the city within municipality, the yellow parcels, and then you start moving out in an orderly way, depending on supply and demand, how much land were needed, and then you'd have the lotteries follow suit. You wouldn't be doing the lotteries all at once. You'd be doing them as you subdivide the land, and you have lots, and you know the size of the lots, and you can then identify the ones that I mentioned earlier. So we've done this for the entire country. Arthur will go through some more of that. We can quantify the potential impact on affordability. We've looked at, again, Clark County, homes built since 2012, and within a half mile of Bureau of Land Management. By the way, on that earlier map, much of the land that's shown in the various colors is outside the land that is left to sell by BLM. They have land that they have scheduled to sell, but again, it's been 27 years and they're still in the process. It's a very slow process. Much of this land is beyond what the BLM, some of it's included, but much of it's beyond what the BLM is already scheduled to sell. So we looked at building in Clark County, and we looked at what if you increase the density from 10.5 homes per acre as built to about 12.5, you get 30% more homes on the exact same amount of land. For each 10% increase in density, home value declines by about 3.5% due to the smaller lot size and home size. This is a relationship we find in virtually every county in the United States, which again is evidence that the home builders aren't raping and pillaging. They are building to what's legal. If you allow light touch density, smaller lots, townhomes, they will build to that density, and the price of the house will go down because the inputs are smaller. The land input and the gross living area input is smaller. The average home with an as-built density of 10.5 per acre is about $520,000, and it's about, there's a typo there, $465,000 at the 13.5. And with the change, you would find median income, the number of homes available to buyers below 100% of area median income increases by a factor of 3.5. As I mentioned before, when you start building lots more houses at a somewhat lower price point, and that price point is now available or affordable to a lower income bracket without subsidy, you start adding lots and lots of houses at and below that price point. And just moving the needle from the 10.5 to the 13.7 more than triples the number of homes that would have been built at a price point that was affordable to below 100% of area median. So you get increased affordability without subsidies. This is just a little chart that shows, the range of what people make based on area median income, ranging from a CEO down to a housekeeper. And you see that the median is somewhere around 116%. And so you want to be at or below that level. And again, you can do that with light touch density and a focus on starter homes without subsidies. As promised, this is the example of the home in Henderson, valued at $395,000 with about 1,600 square feet. The lot size is 2,600 square feet, which is about 17 per acre. This is single family detached. It's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath with almost 1,600 square feet. And it's actually not very far from existing BLM land that we're suggesting be sold to the private sector. We've finished up with a draft declaration by the President of national policy that the nation faces a housing crisis of availability and affordability, in large part due to the severe shortage of housing. This crisis qualifies as a national emergency, and therefore all federal departments and agencies should consider and act accordingly. Solving the housing crisis requires a multifaceted approach by all 3 levels of government, including encouraging the increase in supply of housing, development of housing that's affordable to housing households at all income levels, removing barriers to household production, expanding opportunities for home ownership as primary residences, and expanding the availability of rental housing. So when we talk about townhomes, we know that both for single family detached and townhomes, or particularly townhomes, we know the percentage, county by county, state by state. If you build 100 townhomes, what percentage of them are rental? Well, it varies. Sometimes it's 25%, sometimes it's 35%, could be 50%. That's a sort of an outlier, but normally it's somewhere between 25 and 35%. Said another way, that means 65% of them are owner occupied and 35% are rental. We did a study in Philadelphia, and the Philadelphia newspaper said, why aren't developers building large apartments anymore? And they go through a whole bunch of a litany of explaining that they're not building them. Well, they were looking in the wrong place. They were only looking at high-rise, large multifamily buildings. Well, high-rise, large multifamily buildings have an average of 1 or fewer bedrooms. That's just because you're building on the most expensive land with the most expensive construction cost. So when we said there are plenty of large apartments, they're called townhomes, where you rent a townhome and it has 3 bedrooms or 4 bedrooms or whatever on 3 floors. That's a large apartment, but it's called a townhome. You weren't looking in the right place. And there were thousands and thousands of those townhomes built that were rented. So Section 2, it's a matter of national concern to address this crisis, consistent with the Federal Land Policy and Management Act. It's the policy of the United States. Go through and let's review this. Let's make sure that we're aligning with what the needs are. The Secretary of Interior to use existing authority to take all necessary and appropriate steps to identify and auction off BLM land suitable for residential development in expeditious manner as possible. Examine existing and pending land use plans and develop new ones to determine immediate actions to serve important public objectives, including expansion of communities and economic development. Develop terms and conditions. This is, we think, an important piece of this. We don't want the federal government becoming the zoning czar of localities. That's the last thing we'd like. But we do want to make sure that when the land gets auctioned off, the cities and states are prepared to have the development of those residential subdivisions happen expeditiously, number one, happen with the kinds of starter home potential that we're talking about here. And the developers who are buying that land can, if they buy it in 2028, they can get a shovel in the ground and complete that development rapidly, and they're not held up for 4 or 5 years by a lot of red tape and other regulations. So it needs to be a process, and bottom line is, if you're a state and you want to participate in this program, fine. Make sure you clear away the regulatory underbrush and allow this to happen. Developers, you're buying this land. We're not selling you the land so you can sit on it and speculate on it in terms of the home sweet home. Of course, the Freedom Cities, you're buying 30 square miles and you're going to be developing that, but you have to buy this 30 square mile at the beginning and then develop it over time. So that's going to take capital, but as I said, there are many examples of new cities that were developed. And then addressing the housing crisis, calling on nation's governors and municipal officials to do the same things that he's calling on the federal government to do, and then the reconciliation bill I mentioned. So with that, let's see what time are we? So 10:30. We've got, we're as usual a little over time. We'll take a question or two. Joe. Oh yeah, here comes the mic.
Just read, is that from what you just read, was that from the President's 2.0 or was that from what was just announced?
Neither. It's what I wrote. It's a draft that I wrote.
And with the President's executive order that was January and what was announced this week with the Department
HUD and Interior. So let's talk about the second piece, and Tobias will talk about that a little bit towards the end today. The reality is nobody knows what this task force is. It was just announced. Nobody knows who the members are. Nobody knows what's going on with it. We think what was announced in the Wall Street Journal op-ed earlier this week is a very different approach than what we're approaching here. If you read that op-ed, the word private sector, private development, private land ownership by private developers isn't mentioned once. What it talks about is affordable housing, And when I hear the word affordable housing coming from HUD, I hear capital A affordable housing with subsidies. And that was confirmed when you then read, we're going to lease or transfer land to cities and nonprofits. That is the complete opposite of what we're talking about here. And so we are, and that's one of the reasons we're having this conference. And we've also announced that we'll have a working group of people interested in this topic, and we'll be hosting phone calls. The first one is next week. Yes.
Ed, I was recently in Austin, Texas, where I was speaking to realtors on a number of occasions, and I talked about how Austin had been very progressive in reducing the amount of land needed to put in some new construction. It was like cut by almost 1/4. The realtors were like aghast at my praising this, saying it's really not going to help affordable housing. All it's going to do is put up another $1 million home. How do you respond to that type of criticism?
Well, we respond to that criticism with facts. And the facts are that we look at where those types of conversions have taken place in Seattle, in Houston, in other places around the country. And we see that as you move from the existing home, and I'm just going to make up some numbers, is selling for $1 million, just to have a nice round number. You have two choices, or three choices. You can keep the existing home at $1 million. You can tear it down and build and let's say it's 1,500 square feet. You could build a 3,000 or 4,000 square foot house on it. And that house will sell for maybe $3.5 million. So you are going to add a $2.5 million structure to the $1 million tear down value of the land. And now you have a $3.5 million house. So you've lost $1 million house and you've gained a $3.5 million house, and you still have one house. As you move to 2 houses, 3 houses, 4 houses, 5 houses, let's assume you build 4 townhomes, which is what you can do given the lot sizes in Austin, and you build 4 townhomes or 4 skinny single family detached where there's, like the one I showed you, where there's not much between them. The price of that home might still be $1 million, but you now have 4 homes, 3 extra homes at $1 million. And if you then do that in a neighborhood where the house was $600,000 and you replace it with 4 $600,000 houses, you see that you're adding more supply at a point where there's more demand. It's not necessarily an inexpensive home. But because the land price is so expensive to begin with, in order to justify tearing down, you have to have high land prices in order to say, I'm going to tear down the existing structure, which is more or less perfectly usable. When you talk about raw land, it's a different story. Now you're talking about land that isn't extremely high priced. You're talking about relatively normally priced land. And so at that point, you're not talking about tearing down $1 million house. You're talking about building houses that range from $300,000 to $400,000 to $500,000, depending on the size of the lot and the size of the house. So you've got those two things going. We'll do one more question. Yes. And I apologize for going over here, but.
Thanks, Ed. This is great. I have a couple of questions, but they're all related. I'll fold it together. So how did you guys arrive at the 3,400 minimum lot size figure? And would you consider going lower than that, especially given that SB 15 in Texas right now, which looks like it might pass, is looking at 1,400 square feet minimum lot size, and the starter homes bill in Arizona is looking at 3,000 minimum lot size. Even that house you showed in Henderson was 2,600. So would you guys consider going smaller than 34?
So again, that was for single family detached, which we basically had to make some calculations. Part of this was, how do we calculate how many homes do we get? And to calculate how many homes we get, we need a single family detached lot size, we need a single family attached lot size, and we need a mix. And so we're solving for an equation. And so we basically said, if you just reduce it to 3,800 for single family detached and reduce it to averaging 1,800, it was an averaging 1,800. Some could be at 1,400, some could be at 2,500. You average 1,800. We're not really setting a minimum lot size. We didn't think it was appropriate for the federal government necessarily to say, we want to have a minimum lot size for this. We wanted them to say, you need to allow starter homes, and those starter homes have to be on smaller lots, for single-family detached, and you have to allow townhomes, and those townhomes also need to be on much smaller lots. So that was the logic. We promise we will have time for lots of questions, but I'll turn it over to the next panel, and Mackenzie's going to moderate that panel, and if the panelists would please come up.
All right. Thanks for joining us for this conversation. Ed has described in great detail what Homesteading 2.0 looks like. In this panel, it will discuss how Homesteading 2.0 can bring economic growth and affordability to the West. So we have experts in this area. We have Michael Berkentine, the co-owner of Berkentine Real Estate Group, and Curtis Dubé, the chief economist with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, joining us for this discussion today. So I'd like to start it off by kicking it over to Michael for a brief presentation on what he's imagining this looks like in the economic development opportunities.
Do we have the clicker? All right, so I'd like to start out. Another round of applause for Ed Pinto. Thank you very much. It's been very exciting, and thank you all for being here, and everybody that's on the internet watching. This is an incredible moment in time, especially I'm a developer out of Pennsylvania, and I'll explain who I am in a second, but I just want to share my thoughts at a high level. For the past decade, I have been an advocate of trying to figure out how we could reduce and change the zoning, in the communities that we build, because back in the day, there was a lot more smaller, more affordable houses, and we went into this arena of bigger lots, which requires bigger houses for us to make money as developers. So it's been incredible to watch and be a part of American Enterprise Institute and the conversations. And thank you for the United States Chamber for being here. I truly believe that if we take the next steps with the current administration, that we'll be able to make Homesteading 2.0 and make things affordable again. Again, my name is Michael Berkentine. We're ground up multifamily developers, family office out of South Central Pennsylvania. We're a vertically integrated company, family owned. My dad started it as long as I am old, 36 years ago. He started working for the National Security Agency and then got into home building. And he started his career just building duplexes and small single family homes. He left the NSA, went full time when I was born, and had built 100, 150, 200 homes, and we did really well in the for sale arena. I have two brothers who are 3 years younger than me, Bryce and Brian, who are twins. And when we all graduated from College of Engineering at Penn State, we got into the business and we started developing and diversifying the capital stack and looking at our business in a totally different way. And what that was we went from just selling homes to homeowners to pivoting to allowing people to rent homes in the multifamily townhome arena. And we created this diverse product asset class so that people could move up and kind of grow with us. So people would move into one of our rentals, and then we would build them a house. And we had a lot of that ebbs and flows. Vertically integrated for us means we do everything. We take a raw cornfield, we entitle it, we put the streets, roads, curbs in, do the site work. We do the vertical building all in-house. We have our own property management company, service marketing, and warranty. So all of that is under one umbrella, which I've come to find is super rare in America, probably because it's so darn hard to manage all of those processes in almost individual businesses from the day-to-day operation. But we've done it very successfully. We have a 10,000 unit pipeline. It's been very challenging here as of late with the capital stack. Ben Carson asked me the other night at dinner, if the genie was in a bottle in front of you and the genie popped out, what would you ask the genie? And I said, make the 10-year treasury go to 2.5. And that'd be my request. But President Trump has spoken about the 10-year treasury. We seem like we're going to be on a good course. It's interesting times right now with the trade war, but I think we're all in good hands. And something that we can do to improve housing in America, because like Ed said, we're extremely short on housing. There are pockets in the country that has the opposite inverse effect. Like, for example, Nashville, where they have rentals, they're given 3 months free. It's very difficult. I was in Leland, North Carolina yesterday dealing with the same problem, where all of us developers plus Wall Street got involved. We built a whole bunch of houses, and now we're all competing, and we're having slow lease ups and slow home sales, and it's been an interesting time. Jeff Adler, who's with Yardi Matrix, who I just met in Colorado last week, he spoke about the fact that these saturated areas will convert and they'll be undersupplied by 2027. So I found that interesting. But the general populace of America is in trouble. And one of the reasons we're in trouble is because we do not have the correct ordinance. We do not have the speed to market and giving us the ability to be able to convert home buyers and home renters to a proper payment per month. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. So just click this. Which one do you click? Let's try it.
The green one.
Green one?
Top. Up.
Top one. There we go. So again, what are we solving for? Countries in dire need to fix the supply crisis. We have a very big problem in the country due to inflation and low supply. Not all markets are experiencing the same pain. Majority of Americans are contending with deciding where to live due to sky-high rents and home prices. We're seeing higher volumes of applications on rental homes with denials due to higher debts. This has been increasing year over year, making it more challenging for developers and for renters. The same has been on the new home sales side. Families are stretching the limits to get a decent home, putting themselves under financial pressure. And all of you in this room know friends and family, maybe some of you yourself, that are under financial hardship, or you're running tight because the cost of living is so significant. By increasing supply in specific markets using the American Enterprise way, Homesteading 2.0, we can really increase the quality of our surrounding communities, especially in the out west states where the BLM land is. The plan includes the addition of 3 million new homes, and that's basically, like Ed stated, through using the homes near existing cities. That's 1.5 million, and then the Freedom Cities, which is an additional 1.5 million. I love the making housing affordable again. I love the topic there. We talked about the impact of smaller lots. One big thing that's near and dear, which is on the next slide too, which is reducing the red tape during the approval process, the acquisition and approval fees by working with the local towns and developers, things like sewer and water tap fees. One thing that popped up this morning is bonding amounts, and also recreational fees, and others will be much more affordable by driving down those costs. The speed to market, as Ed pointed out earlier, this is extremely important, and things that we run into, and we'll speak about that. Make sure a product is essential for planning process to deliver affordable new homes and rental homes. This diverse range of new homes and apartments will help the American people make decisions based on the financial needs. And that includes singles, garden-style apartments, townhomes, villas, and then there's many other product types that we could investigate that Ed pointed out earlier. This is a fun slide that I wanted to share with you guys. The economic issue, construction starts have been trending down since Q2 of 2023. And as you can see on this chart, this hurts the supply in the next few years, as we are not starting as many homes as developers due to economic conditions. Those conditions range from a multitude of things: inflation of product cost, the cost of our employees keeps going up, and everyone in the room is seeing the inflation that's happening and continues to happen. And not to mention, a big problem right now is the cost of raw land. A lot of landowners are still thinking that it's 3 or 4 or 5 years ago where we can they can get what used to be, because we're still kind of hanging on, trying to get back to that point. So that's been a struggle from an acquisition standpoint. Increasing the supply with Homestead 2.0 helps solve the issue to increase economic growth. Another economic issue, rents are lower versus cost of owning. The cause of this is not just interest rates. Many people jump to the cause and effect of, why is everything so high? Well, the interest rates. Well, it's not just that. One of the big components is the length of approvals, red tape. In the next slide, we're going to talk about the average length of approvals in America is around 5 years. That means if we buy a cornfield to develop around a city, it takes us on average around 5 years. Now, some projects, it depends on the municipality. If they're small or big, it can become a lot easier. But the ones, for example, we have a project around Raleigh, one of the longest projects that has ever taken place in our portfolio history. Construction costs and materials, it's been a struggle. It continues to be a struggle. President Trump, is helping us with the tariffs. It doesn't seem like that now. It's pretty painful. We field a lot of calls of, hey, Mike, costs are going up. You're going to have to absorb. I tell them, well, if that's the price we have to pay in the short term to help the federal government, then that's what we have to do. But we're battling that as developers. It's been, not so easy, but we will get through it. Site work costs, that's all of your, your different equipment and contractors that come out and put all the utilities in, the streets, roads, curbs. This stuff is extremely expensive, and all the more the reason to build smaller lots and to be able to get more density. And Homesteading 2.0 is going to allow developers to ease these costs. So you can see 2,420 versus 1,783. That price of that home needs to come down. American people are getting hit in the head with the amount of costs that are coming into them, and we need to fix this problem. And now is the time to do so. The speed to market is critical, as I mentioned. The current process is 5+ years and requires funding by private and nonprofit developers alike. Soft but real cost, time and uncertainty. We need to cut the time from 5 to less than 1, which I put in red, because if we could actually do that, that would be amazing. And I truly do believe that the American Enterprise Institute and the things that we're talking about here is not just going to affect the out west states that with the BLM. Other municipalities around the country are going to watch what we do and watch how this happens, and they're going to learn, and it will be a rapid growth off of that. I truly do believe that. I think that's one of the goals of this. The zoning process currently takes 2 years. Change to by right zoning with possible preference to affordable, partial affordable housing aligned with pre-approved HUD, tax credit bonus areas, real estate tax exemptions, all of those things. If you want to take a piece of property in America today and you want to rezone it, most people run the other direction because it's a fight. You have extreme high attorney fees, and typically you need a solid attorney to be able to walk you through the process. It's very, very costly and becomes truly a nightmare in some cases. Permitting currently takes 2 years. Again, that is an average. It can go up and down. Change to enable pre-approved permitted housing product designs, expand 30-day war room, all department processes. We actually have a Senator Kristen Phillips Hill in Pennsylvania that actually just put in a policy for our MPDS permits, and which is the stormwater erosion control, Department of Environmental Protection stuff. And she put in this kind of warp speed process in Pennsylvania because it was taking a long time to be able to get these permits to be able to start construction. And what happens is when you get all your financing dialed in, you start paying interest and you start burning up the capital stack. and it becomes a real issue. She put in some policies that now it's moving quicker. We have more employees to be able to review things. So that type of thing needs to go into effect across the country. And those are the little tweaks that we can do to help American developers, which again is going to help the American people. Prioritize inspection process to speed completions and reduce holding costs. That's another big one. We have a job in South Carolina right now that the inspection processes are not good. They're you're talking they're coming out 3 or 4 times for one inspection because of the red tape and the amount of scrutiny that you're under. It's different parts of the country are easier, different parts are harder. And that's one thing that'll go into Homesteading 2.0 and that I want to personally help evaluate as we go in and making sure we're picking the right spots to start. Tax credit public activity bond application process currently takes at least 1 year, often multiple years, and that has to do with staff changing process and harmonizing state and local agency requirements. So in conclusion, you know, Homesteading 2.0 is definitely a play on housing in America, and I do feel personally, everyone's heard Secretary Turner came out recently. There was a Wall Street Journal article that hit, and I believe Secretary Turner tweeted on X. So things are progressing. In the past 7 days, they've been having closed door conversations. So we look forward to working with Secretary Turner and Secretary Burgum on this and essentially taking what their already thoughts are and what President Trump's thoughts are and helping inspire and put together the right team so that we deliver the proper acquisition channels and planning process for the American people. So in conclusion, thank you all for having me today, and thank you for the U.S. Chamber for being here.
Thanks so much, Michael. We will have some follow-up questions based upon that incredible presentation. And I love the economic look at the impact of the housing market through your experience as a developer. I would love to take a moment and zoom out a little bit. And Curtis, as an economist that's studying a little bit broader of a scope, how do you see housing affecting the economy, the lack of affordable housing, and how could you see Homesteading 2.0 contributing to our economies?
Well, thanks, Mackenzie. Michael, you're a better man than I. I could not wait 5 years for permitting. I'd absolutely lose my mind. So, I mean, I think let's focus on the West, which is kind of what we came to talk about. There's a big issue right now. We have a shortage of labor to rebuild Southern California after the wildfires. And Las Vegas I would put that in kind of the same geographical region. All these things matter. We need to get as many people and workers as we possibly can into that region. They have to rebuild homes. There's not enough homes to begin with. So there's going to be a spillover effect. This could have a huge impact on helping to get Los Angeles and Southern California rebuilt because there's still a huge amount of demand in Las Vegas and in Nevada. So I look at it from just kind of the regional aspect, and that we're looking at several years to rebuild in that area. Anything that can speed that process along is going to be good for that local economy and the national economy. That's a big part of our economy. There's a huge amount of people that live there. There's a huge amount of production. So anything that we can help to do to speed that process along would be beneficial. When it comes to this absolutely should be done. We have a housing shortage across the country. We have it. We just use Zillow's number. It's like 4.5 million. That's a lot of units. That's a lot of units that we need built across the country. Now, obviously, we can't do it quickly for a lot of reasons, but we should be doing it faster. And if we could move that process along, we could bring down the price of homes, which is such a huge problem for so many people around the country. And the spillover effect is enormous. So of course you're going to have the impacts. So the home builders are going to do better. The banks are going to do better that finance. But all the construction companies, all the outfitters for the houses, of course that's a big direct impact. But businesses are going to do. This is a reason why we've gotten into it at the chamber, is because businesses are feeling such a pinch when it comes to housing. Now you would think that it's just like, okay, with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, so it's just going to be the big companies in San Francisco, LA, New York, DC, Boston. maybe a few other cities. That is not the case. We certainly hear from businesses in those places that they have a really hard time attracting talent because they can't get, even if they pay top dollar, it's still incredibly expensive for their workers to move there. And even if the workers can afford the really high home prices, there's not a lot available. So it really curtails their ability to attract talent to those areas. So yeah, we hear from those companies, but we hear from chambers in rural Nebraska that they don't have housing for the migrant workers that come and work in the fields during the summer. We hear from areas that are heavy in vacation and travel and tourism. So Jackson Hole, Wyoming, Hilton Head, South Carolina. There isn't housing for the temporary workforce. Winter in Jackson Hole, summer in Hilton Head. So this is an issue that is spanning the entire country. It's hitting every type of geographic area you can think of, and that's why we've gotten into it. So there would be a huge benefit, and we did some numbers that we haven't released yet, right? But we'll put them out soon that shows how much economic benefit you can get from the direct impact of building new homes, but also the indirect impact that comes from making it easier to attract workers, lowering the price of homes for families, and all those other secondary impacts that we should not discount either.
Thanks, Curtis. Michael, based upon your experience in development, how have you seen local businesses and communities, reflecting back on your experience over the last 20 years, impacted, or 30 years, from this initiative or from building more homes? And how do you see this initiative impacting communities in the West?
Well, it's a good question, and it's very exciting when you build new communities in an area that needs them, because the job creation gets better. You know, things down to your local YMCA's start to grow. I've seen massive parks get put in with rec fees that are paid by developers. You know, indoor sports complexes so that the kids can play, you know, soccer and baseball and football. And then the local businesses thrive. I mean, we own strip malls in these areas, and you can see, you know, the more people you bring, obviously, the better the better the businesses do. And I tell you, we talk a lot about developing on my side, but from a business standpoint, you know, local business, it's night and day. I mean, when you bring in good communities that have density, these businesses really thrive and go to the next level. And it's fun to watch because you can kind of see the struggle, and then you put in a 200-unit multifamily building or 200 villas. All of a sudden, the door starts swinging, the parking lot's moving, and you know the steam engine's running. So I think you know, just from a general sense, that's the fun in it. That's the importance.
And your group is really unique with the 4 aspects that you cover that you went over earlier. How do you think, why is it important to have this multifaceted approach to real estate development? And how could it be leveraged in these opportunities in the West?
Well, you know, the multifaceted approach that we have, it's helped us control the narrative, you know, from a lending standpoint and so forth. Not all developers are going to have everything under one roof, but you know, if you come in to an area that has solid zoning and solid rules and regulations and permitting process, you don't necessarily have to have it all under one roof. You know, you can come in as let's say you're a developer that is just starting out. This is a good opportunity for you to go win a bid and take it to the next level and migrate your way through the development process, build a business. So there's a lot of young people in America right now that are looking for those opportunities, but they cannot get into it because you have to have significant capital just to buy one rental home in America if you're trying to get into reoccurring assets, and it's just not easy. So this is it's gonna deliver a huge opportunity to all walks of life. So that's what I'm thinking.
Mm-hmm. Both of you touched a little bit on workforce. Curtis, I would love for you to dive in a little bit more on how you see businesses' ability to attract and retain talent improved through this process, but even what you were discussing a little bit of how it might be hard to get the builders to build in these areas right now because there's not enough housing. So how do you see this coming into play?
Yeah, it's a circular problem. There's not enough housing, there's not enough workers, there's not enough workers, there's not enough housing. So how do you get people to come to the region? And that's part of getting more housing built. So we have to do, it's all of the above. We have to find all different ways. We have to build more density on existing footprints. We have to then go out into areas where there is, we haven't built up and do that all. Particularly have to focus on density in areas where there's mass transit. There's a huge amount of demand. So to live here around Metro, Boston, around the T, New York subway, we don't do a good job of doing that. But when it comes to the opportunity with the BLM sales, I think what it could do is be kind of like a test case. So we can't have 27 years to have sale of BLM land. So hopefully the new administration can help speed that along. Because if, say, we can get a huge number of units built in, say, the next 5 years, and that helps in just the whole southwestern part of the country, then we have something to point to say, hey, look at the benefits. Look at the number, we built this many number of units. They sold really quickly. The population grew in that area. Business is thriving. This is what you can do if you can get more units built. Doesn't matter where you are. Now, from what I understand, most of the BLM is out in the West, but they own a lot of land all over the country. So we can replicate that, and states and localities own land too. We can replicate that around the country in areas where government holds land, and then we can just use it as a case that, hey, look, at your permitting and process is slowing down, building so fast, but we know because of what happened in Nevada that when you build, you get this huge benefit. And so if you have a huge housing shortage, it's going to translate into workforce issues as well. So that's happening all around the country. So we have to do everything we can. But I mean, I think it's a real opportunity to show the benefits, because I think you get from the NIMBYs, right, that, well, there's all these other issues. So I would assume that the thing that they're going to push back hardest on in developing in Nevada is water. Right? There's not going to be enough water for everyone to come and build here, and you're just going to put a huge amount of stress on those resources. And they're able to slow it down, and they're able to kind of shift public opinion. But if we can get some examples where there's a huge amount of building in a short amount of time, and those negative impacts aren't that great, and we have a huge benefit, I think it will really help us in the long run.
Michael, so I would, as a subdivision builder, how feasible is it to roll out Home Sweet Home, so the 1.5 million on nearby cities, as Ed outlined?
It's very feasible with the right team. We have the administration right now to be able to implement Homesteading 2.0 and Home Sweet Home. Love the name, by the way. And we gotta take the time and all of the initiative. We need to convert into action steps. And the beauty of all of this is President Trump's ready to go. Secretary Turner is ready to go. Secretary Burgum is right there, ready to go. So this is perfect timing. We have some next steps that we're going to do, but we need to cut the red tape. We need to speed the market. We need the land costs to be right. We need the fees, the sewer water tap fees, and working with the municipalities. We have a lot of friends, Kyle Peters in South Dakota with A1 Development. We have a lot of different people around the country that can help us migrate through the local towns and municipalities, pick the right spots to start in, because if we want to begin this process in July 4th of 2026, perfect day to really launch the program. We have a lot of planning to do. You have a lot of work and a lot of people to talk to from a local jurisdiction, and planning, making sure the utilities are ready to rock and roll. So it's all doable. It's extremely feasible. But we have to act now. We have a short amount of time to get it done.
Thinking a little bit more long-term, Curtis, with our Freedom Cities concept of developing new cities with new businesses, how do you see that affecting the long-term, having a long-term impact on the economy of these popping up with new cities with surrounding homes over the next 40 to 50 years?
Again, I think it's kind of what I talked about earlier. It's an example that you can have a huge benefit if you can do, if you can get housing built. There's a huge amount of benefits that come with it, and it can really push back on the NIMBY part of it. If you don't mind, I was going to ask Michael a question about, because that's basically a year away, July 4th, 2026. Say we reduce the permitting, the red tape, right? And we're ready to go and build a whole bunch of units. I'm just curious, how feasible is it to get the materials, given all the stuff going on with trade too, and then worker availability? I'm a big proponent of the market, that if there's a huge amount of jobs available and they pay really well, people will move into them, but it does take a little bit of while for those adjustments to take place.
It is a great question. There will be, if you launch July 4th, 2026, there will be, like running a small business, there's startup, lag, where you're going to have a shortage of workers and so forth, and which will be a vital item. But like in the multifamily business, there's a lot of skilled labor that will actually follow you, okay? And that's also true for the nationals. You look at Ryan Homes, you look at Lennar, some of the biggest builders in our country, there is a lot of trades that follow them. So if we strategically, we start making the Treasury money. This whole project's $100 billion to the Treasury. President Trump will like that number. And if we take it and we direct it, the people will come. They will come. Now, it's been a topic of conversation because if you're in the middle of nowhere, well, it doesn't feel as, are they really going to come? If you do it at the right way, at the right scale, and the absorption's there, the absorption's critical for developers, then the trades will follow you, and they figure it out. They create their own housing situations. I've seen guys in the multifamily world, bunk up 10 heads in beds, sharing places to work and build. So if the money's there and the opportunity's there, they will follow.
That was a great question. And I think it will kick us off into opening up questions for the audience. So if we are ready there, it looks like we have one up front. And you're welcome to ask Curtis or Mike, please.
Very good. Considering infrastructure, who would be responsible for funding and building expanded sewage treatment plants, power plants, things of that nature, and also the time lag in getting permits for that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So that's another thing that could hinder startup costs if we have to put in some septic and so forth. But typically the way that works is, let's say we have 4 or 5 or 6 parcels that we're going to auction off at the same time, and we rally up a whole bunch of developers that are excited. They bid on it, and each property gets sold to 6 different developers. Let's just say those 6 are going to be put into a room like this, and we're going to discuss with the town how we can fast track that. And there are ways to fast track those type of things, in the short term, and then tie into maybe a long-term piece so that the construction can continue. So it can be quite simple. I think we overcomplicate that a lot in America. I know we do, actually. And there are means and methods to streamline it in the short term while we're building out the long-term solution to tie in. You just have to have the right mindset from a local municipality to be able to get things done like that. You have municipalities that are anti-growth, and then you have ones that are pro-growth, and the ones that are typically pro-growth are willing to work with you in those different steps and periods of time. Yeah, so the question is, will the developer be charged for all of the utility resources, or will the town, or how will that work? I think it's going to be a negotiation. Typically it can be one way or the other. It can be right in the middle. But I think with the proper team, we're going to go into the towns. We're going to say, hey, this is what we're looking to do, and we're willing to have the developers pay X and your city pay Y. And I think that's just a negotiation. It'll be different every state that we go into. But there'll be some states that will probably say, hey, we have the funding right now. And perhaps President Trump gets involved in some way, shape, or form and says, we'll handle that piece. If you're going to deliver 100,000 homes right there, and you can make me money, the government, quicker than than waiting. So he's a businessman. That's a business decision. And, again, I told that genie in the bottle, we want to get the 10-year treasury down. So I want to get the debt paid off and get the system back working again. So it's one way to do it.
I just want to say that on this question that you're dealing with, we actually have someone in the audience from Howard Hughes Development on the Travalis development that I mentioned earlier, and he's agreed to make a few comments when this panel finishes. So we actually have somebody who's doing all of those things that you're asking questions about.
Thank you. There's over 5,000 opportunity zones in the United States. I have a number of developer colleagues who are very active in that. One of the big problems they have is the 100% match. And would you like to, can you comment on that, any of you, about how we can get that changed and what incremental change that might happen from utilizing these zones more?
I haven't looked at it in too long to comment. I'm afraid I'll say something incorrect.
Yeah, I don't know opportunity zones as well as most. We've had some opportunities to go in opportunity zones that just did not pan out. I believe Dr. Carson was the main fellow that, yeah, Secretary Carson. Yeah, and Secretary Turner. So yeah, we'd have to talk with those guys about some of those disciplines and how we could answer that question better. So I don't want to stick my foot in my mouth by answering that too quick, too soon. But I think if the right people in the room, we could work things like that out.
Hi, I'm just curious as to how agreeable more top-down, progressive authoritarian types are to these ideas, and if so, in particular, which ones or what?
You talking from a location standpoint?
No, I'm just talking theoretically. How, when you talk about, more bottom-up free market libertarian types,
Yeah.
This is fantastic, right? But when you talk about a more progressive, top-down authoritarian type, how do they feel about all this stuff?
I think I understand what you're saying. So I'll just give you examples. I live here in DC, and there's a huge push from the DC city government to build more density. They just knocked down this huge commercial development right in Friendship Heights and are building hundreds of units right on top of the metro. They want to do so up and down Connecticut Avenue as well. So I actually think there's kind of a broad political agreement that we need more housing. I think it's so overwhelmingly obvious that it's cutting across the political spectrum at this point. I think the difference is that you have on the right, let's cut permitting, let's cut red tape, right? Let's make it, you want to build anywhere. Let's make America more like Houston. You want to build something somewhere, go ahead and do it. And on the left, it's much more, how do we get government involved to build in more density in areas closer to public transit. I think it's pretty obvious where they look. So they have those two different views. We're so short of it. I think both kind of can work right now and don't conflict.
Yeah, I think my answer would be take the politics out of it. I know I talk a lot about the administration and so forth, but at the end of the day, the American people we need to solve the problem. Everybody in the room knows somebody that's struggling with housing and how much it costs. And if we look at it from a humanitarian standpoint, it's solvable. This can make a big dent. And if we just take the politics out of it, we're going to see a lot of good things happen with it.
I think there's a tendency for both sides to say, so for the left to say, no, we don't want you driving. We want you to be able to jump on a train or bus and go to your work or live in mixed-use development. So you have to live in kind of a very dense area, and the right saying, no, single-family homes. I think people choose where they want to live. They reveal their preferences very obviously. And long as you allow the market to create all different types of housing, people will sort themselves to where they want to live.
We have a few questions from online. So, and one thing we have found with all of our case studies is if you get out of the way, the private market abhors a vacuum. And if you get out of the way and buy right and you cut the red tape, they will build. If there's economic feasibility, the private market will figure out a way to assemble the labor, the materials up. What they need is land and keep it simple, regulation. If they have those two things, they will figure out a way to do it. One question is, what effective partnerships been established to address labor force, particularly with respect to training and acquisition of needed tools? I'd just add that one of the things we talk about a lot is the Montana Miracle, which we had Governor Giannaforte speak at our conference a year or two ago. And they faced this problem, and they put in, through regulation, a whole bunch of things to develop additional workforce training. One of the things that they found was the governor could just change the rule that said for every carpenter, every trainee, you needed 2 carpenters per trainee, and he reversed it and said you have 2 trainees per carpenter. Well, the rule had been put in place to stop new carpenters, to keep the wages up and to keep the supply tight, just like it is in housing. So the question is, how can you have effective partnerships to get the trained labor force and skilled labor force you need?
Yeah, I can take that. There's a lot of organizations. A buddy of mine runs ABC Training Facility in Baltimore, Maryland. And I was actually supposed to tour it today with him, but had this meeting. And essentially, there's a tremendous effort around the country by organizations out there that are bringing in the skilled force labor and teaching them and bringing them in a big way and placing them in jobs and taking it to the next level. I think partnerships with people like that is huge. I was in Mar-a-Lago yesterday night and for Senator Lloyd Schmucker or Congressman Lloyd Schmucker, and talking about a lot of different people were there about placing workers and skilled workers in the labor force. And there's a huge effort. I mean, there's a million different organizations that can be partnered with. And, you know, I wouldn't be too concerned. Mike Rowe, if you're out there listening, let's partner together. He's been a big advocate of bringing people in, and I think he would enjoy this project as well. So people like that would be great.
I think, again, big proponent of markets work. I think young people are starting to realize the cost of higher education is so high, and are starting to tie it to returns. And I think that will make a big difference going forward, that we are so short on the trades, and those jobs pay well. They don't tend to be able to be outsourced. They're going to be there for the long run, that people are realizing that, and you can start working at 18. You don't give up 4 to 6 years or even longer for college, and you don't forgo hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's a pretty good way to go if you're not so interested in college. You're not going to go into a huge amount of debt. So I think I think there will be a realization in that comes with, yeah, we have to, then that puts pressure on the states to fix those kind of apprenticeship programs. So I think that's coming, and I think it's going to be market driven by the huge run up in price of higher education.
And the Chamber has several initiatives on this, including a talent pipeline management system where we work with local communities, and we're also looking for where other employees can come from, including second chance hiring, and for those who are released from prison and have proven a track record of employment, along with hiring those with disabilities. And obviously those would be different fields, but that is a high priority for the Chamber as well.
The next question is, how would you ensure that these homes wouldn't be gobbled up by investors in these high demand areas, instead would be owner occupied? And I think we already said that the lottery would be for first time home buyers. Again, you could have some fraud and stuff, but the idea is that first time home buyers, and I think, again, the others are for move up buyers, first time buyers. These are not, as I envision it, that you wouldn't be able to buy 10 of these houses. A question that's sort of related to that is, maybe for you, Mike, 2 things. If all of a sudden there's an announcement that over the next 10 years, a fair amount of land in places X, Y, Z, you know, we had states and we have communities where that land would be coming onto the market. Would just the supply of that land sort of free up other land where you've got landowners sitting on it and just thinking, oh, we can just sit on this and watch the price keep going up. But once some more supply comes on, maybe they decide to put their land on the market, which would be good. And then the second thing is, what's the advantage potentially for having the lottery where a developer creates a subdivision, with 500 lots and has 250 of them pre-sold effectively through the lottery? What does that do for the development process?
Yeah, so first question, I mean, it's going to be a ripple effect. So if the government says, hey, we're gonna sell these parcels over here, and then Tom and Mary over here have parcels that they've been sitting on, family farms or whatever have you, in prime locations, that will inspire them to get involved. And they'll, again, the whole country will be learning from how we do this, but those people will, theoretically they'll monetize, and then they'll do better, and it'll create more economic growth in the whole area. And then the lottery system, it's an interesting concept because if you're able to pre-sell homes as a developer, I mean, that's like the golden word. And that goes for multifamily, leasing as well, if you're able to pre-lease, because you're going into a project knowing that you have sales, the banks are more comfortable, and the whole capital stack is sitting there going, okay, well, you have, 100 sales already. Well, that's fantastic. It makes everything a lot easier on the developer. And I'm interested to dive deeper into the lottery system, but I do think that it will help us and developers, and then, ultimately come down to the savings in the home.
Take one last question in the room.
I want to build off of Ed's question about, or comment about supply just a bit. And I'm curious to see, we're all talking about increasing the supply of housing, but a couple big trends seem like they could cause some issues in the future. And that is both demographic decline, and we have a lot of baby boomers now who are aging in place. Eventually, those houses are going to come back online. So I'm kind of curious, Michael, from your perspective as a business owner, how are you guys kind of planning for that in advance? And Curtis, from a macro perspective, how do you see that intersecting with, this large increase in supply?
It kind of ranges market to market, how we look at that. Just as near as yesterday, I'm in Leland, North Carolina, and there's these 55 plus communities are starting to pop up that are actually rentals, which is something that's new. I haven't really seen that too much. And then in addition, there's large communities being built, in areas that we're in that are for sale, that they bought, and then they're coming available, and it's saturating the market. So I think it's something to keep an eye on. As a developer, let's say we go in and we're bidding on a piece of property in one of these states. We're looking at all that stuff. Now, we as leaders of this initiative, we got to be looking at that stuff as well, and making sure that we do not turn these cities into oversaturation, because if a whole bunch of developers go into one space at the same time, and there's not enough people to buy the houses or fill the beds, we're going to overbuild, and then they're going to sit, and then we're going to deter other builders to come in because, well, we all have properties sitting, and it's costing us an interest burn 7% plus. So that can really eat the whole game alive. So we have to be very strategic, very smart in how we do it, and making sure that we guide the people in the right direction, and understanding the markets that we're in is going to be very instrumental. And to your question, we have to take that into account.
I'll just add that you gave me a good idea. I don't think we have good data on how many of the extra units will be coming onto the market. I think you're probably right that it will increase, but we don't have a good metric to figure what that will be. So I think that's a good research opportunity.
And the last thing I would add is, from our research, is that boomers are holding on to larger houses. And we are talking about starter homes and the increase of starter homes, which is a different audience. So as people are moving from starter homes to larger homes, these then starter homes would become available. Ed, is there anything you'd like to add before we close?
No, what we're going to do is, because we have Greg Fitchett here, take the opportunity to just ask him to follow up on some of these questions before we break for lunch. So let's thank panel 2. And you can give Greg here the microphone. And then let me say a few things and then, whoops. Last person that did that was Alan Greenspan. So this question about what's known as the silver tsunami, I've been reading about that for 30 plus years. I think Barron's had an article in the mid-90s about the coming crash of house prices. And it hasn't happened yet. Zillow did a big study. Paul Kupiak and I did a pushback on it 7 or 8 years ago. And the reality is that being an early baby boomer and knowing a lot of baby boomers in my social circle, there's no hurry to move until the ultimate happens. There's no desire to move. And people are just, they like their house and they will stay in their house until they literally get out for no other reason than that they can't live there anymore because they died. And I can still remember my first job. We were talking about this in 1974 in Michigan State Housing Development Authority. We were talking about how we're going to free up these houses. And so it's been around. Eventually they will get freed up, but as Mackenzie said, these are older, larger homes. Many of them could be torn down and you build, multiple houses. They're in areas with relatively high land values in many cases. But you have to think about the housing market we have in the United States. Is the analogy I use is a pressure cooker. So what's the point of a pressure cooker? Is to allow the boiling point to exceed 212. We have a pressure cooker housing market, and California is the perfect example. How many people have net domestic out-migration in California in the last 35 years? 4.5 million people. Now, yes, they've had in-migration, international in-migration, that's offset that a fair amount, not completely. They've had some surplus of births over deaths, but that has shifted to where they now have population has declined for a few years. And you go, well, wait a minute, how come California still has the highest house prices by far in the entire country if they've lost all these people? The answer is they are a housing pressure cooker. So you can't actually measure what the housing needs are other than to look at the one measure we tend to think about is median house price to median income. If the median house to median income is 10, then you're short a lot of houses. And in Las Vegas, it's 6 or 5. In Montana, it's 6. And so why did Montana pass the Montana Miracle? Because they have really high house prices relative to incomes. And so what happens is we don't even know what the shortage is in California because all we know is they have more people living in the parents' basement than any place else. We know that there are people doubling up who don't want to double up. We know that there are people living in their cars and living in encampments and living on the street and living in shelters. 1% of LA lives in a shelter or an encampment. We know that there are people couch surfing. We know people have moved out of state by the millions. That tells you that this is a pressure cooker. And as you add more housing, it isn't going to show up immediately as some improvement because you have to get that pressure from 230 degrees to 225 to 220, and eventually you get down to 212. You don't even want to be at 212, but at least you're now at 1 atmosphere. And eventually you have to get it down to a level that actually works. And then we also know that there are people, and this is part of this process of adding in the middle. We know there are a lot of people that aren't in the type of housing they want to be in. They want to have a family. They can't have a family because they can't afford a house with the right number of bedrooms to have a family. And so they postpone having a family. We're doing all kinds of things, both in terms of our economy and demographics, that's having all kinds of distortions, all because we refuse to allow adequate housing supply to be built by the market. And so again, I'm not Pollyanna on this, but I don't expect that we're going to run into a problem for quite a long time. And part of the lottery that we're saying in terms of if we have a lottery, that's going to give you a barometer. And that lottery would be held, you know, not all held at once. You'd hold it a series as those subdivisions are available and platted. You would then have a lottery for that subdivision. You're now getting an instant response like a survey. Those people have to say, I want to buy a lot and I'm putting in for the lottery, and they win the lottery. Then they have to go through the purchase process, just like if you're driving by a subdivision and you see homes for sale, lots for sale, you know, the houses haven't been built yet. You're driving, well, I want to buy one of those houses and it's going to take a year to build. Well, you win the lottery, now you start your year process. That gives you a demand indicator of what's going on that you don't otherwise have. So that's one of the, you know, there are many reasons for doing the lottery, but part of it is just to get, you know, a feel of what's going on in the market. So as I said, we're fortunate to have Greg Fitchett here, who's with Howard Hughes, and he has the microphone. And I'm just going to ask a couple of questions. Greg heard the questions largely about, well, how do you go about this? How do you start? And as I said, Teravalis is a new city of 100,000 homes. So think of that. There's probably 250 to 300,000 residents ultimately, 50 million square feet of commercial space, and all the other stuff that you have to build starting from scratch. And Greg also has experience with Columbia, Maryland. So Greg, what's the answer to how do you start this process? How do you attract, you know, builders, employers? How do you employees? How do you get the infrastructure? Tell us about that.
Thanks, Ed, and it's thanks for the opportunity to speak, and thanks also for, you know, what AEI has proposed here. I think everyone knows the challenge of housing affordability throughout the country, the lack of housing supply. It's a massive problem. It has been for years. Nobody's really come up with a good solution. But what I think, you know, what you've come up with here really is a creative and thoughtful way that could add a huge amount of housing supply that's so badly needed to the country. And also, usually when people talk about affordable housing and housing affordability, it tends to focus on rental and subsidy. And what you've come up with here is an idea to be able to expand home ownership opportunities, so which has other benefits as well. So I want to compliment you and Arthur and your whole team for coming up with this idea. The answer to your question, how do you do it? It's complicated. It requires a lot of planning, and it also requires a lot of upfront investment. And that's one thing that I think, you know, I'm not sure, I haven't seen your proposal, and you know, I'm only recently become familiar with the proposal, but one question that I have is there an infrastructure financing mechanism that could be partnered with it? Because that's really going to be the challenge that I see in how do you even, you know, certainly with the Freedom Cities where you're like out in the middle of nowhere, but also even in the closer in areas, building that infrastructure, as was mentioned, the water supply, campuses and the wastewater treatment and the roads and the power, all that infrastructure is incredibly expensive and requires a huge upfront investment in order to, before that first house can be delivered. In Teravalis, we are under construction with our first village, Floreo, and we've been, you know, working on that infrastructure we've been building it for over 2 years, and we're still a good, you know, 6 or so months away before the first person moves in. So it requires a huge upfront investment in order to have those houses actually be able to be moved into. And in different areas, whether it's Columbia, Maryland, or, you know, we have the Woodlands in Texas, we have, you know, the community in Arizona, we have our Summerlin in Las Vegas. Each area has different mechanisms to sort of assist with the financing. So in Maryland, you know, we did a big TIF to do a, you know, tax increment financing bond to finance the infrastructure there for more urban development. Columbia's been in development for almost 60 years now. In Texas, we have the MUDs that have been, you know, hugely helpful with the development of the Woodlands and Bridgeland in the Texas or in the Houston market. And in Teravalis, we are working with the city of Buckeye on with a community financing district, community facilities district. So these are all different you know, ways to finance that upfront infrastructure that's so incredibly capital intensive. I think it's something that you know you might want to look at Is there a way that, that could be part of the proposal as well? Because I think that's probably going to be the biggest challenge is, especially with the Freedom Cities where, the amount of upfront investment that is going to take to actually have people want to, move out there and live there and have that be possible. It's going to be massive. And, but if this is a federal proposal and the federal government is a partner in that, then it could be feasible.
So one of the thoughts, all of the governors, Democrat and Republican, are all saying we need more housing out west. I mean, across the country, but particularly out west for the reasons that I mentioned. And one of our suggestions is, rather than, for example, Nevada, when I was in Nevada 2 weeks ago in Las Vegas, and I was meeting with someone who runs a statewide group on housing, and he was saying the governor was getting ready to announce a $500 million housing proposal, and he thought 300 million was going to go to down payment assistance. And I'm going, wait a minute, Nevada has the least affordability, the biggest housing shortfall of virtually any place in the country, and you're going to goose demand with $300 million? That doesn't make any sense. And I said, you'd be better up, spend the $300 million on infrastructure. And the same thing I would say to other governors. I met with the governor's office in New Mexico also when I was out west last week, and said, spend your money on infrastructure, not on housing subsidies. You can get affordability across a broad range by doing what we're suggesting, just by modestly higher densities, building townhomes, shrinking lot sizes, shrinking home sizes, and really get family, sizes. And to Greg, your point, the tax increment increase is substantial. The infrastructure requirements don't go up proportionately as you move from 4 homes per acre based on lot size to 6 homes to 8 homes to 20 or 30 homes in a townhouse. They don't go up dollar for dollar as you increase, because you have some real economies of scale that come in. But the tax dollars, as I mentioned before, if you just do the math, if you build homes at 4 per acre and the house is selling for, pick a number, $500,000, that's $2 million an acre. But if you build 20 townhomes per acre at $350,000, that's $7 million. What did I say? 20, is it 4 million? What did I, 20 times half was, yeah. And so you get a lot more tax revenue per acre by having that higher density. You do have some higher costs, but the higher costs don't go up proportionally. We always hear about the schools, and again, sort of the reverse of the silver tsunami is there is a dearth of children. The number of children that are being born, the rate is dropping. The school-age children is dropping. And we need children, but you're going to get some more if you build family-sized housing. But again, I look at the neighborhood in Bethesda that's always complaining about adding anything, yet there were more children in that neighborhood. We used to have 2 schools in the neighborhood. Now there's 1 that's shared with another neighborhood, because there just aren't very many children in that neighborhood anymore. But again, they're just always complaining about adding more children, even though there are hardly any children. So these are things that we have to address both at the state level and a national level. Anything else you'd like to add, Greg, on just how one goes about this? I know Howard Hughes has done this for many years, is a large-scale new city developer, one of the few in the country, and you need a pretty substantial capital stack to do that. But it's certainly a demonstration that it can be done. You just ticked off 3 or 4 places you've done it.
Yeah, I guess the only other thing I would add is and I think, again, you and Arthur and your team have sort of begun this work at a very high level, is the amount of planning and engineering work and thought that needs to go into actually making these things happen. So, if there was a way to help, that, again, huge sort of upfront cost, that's an investment that doesn't start to pay. I mean, it pays, but it may pay, 5 years if you're lucky, but more likely 10, 15, 20, 30 years down the road. So, these kind of large scale, massive projects really require partnership with the government require, whether it's the local governments, whether it's the state governments or the federal governments. It really has to be a partnership if it's going to work. It's one thing that I've definitely seen in my career.
So when they use like tax increment financing, for example, are you basically doing zero coupon bonds that you get the money up front, but you don't pay any interest for 10 years because you have zero coupon for a certain period of time?
So the TIF that we did in Columbia, which we've really developed sort of a new, downtown in the Columbia, which used to be sort of a mall and an amphitheater and a lake. We were able to develop the downtown there by working with the county to issue bonds where we basically said, we're going to build all this, but we need help up front in order to do it. So the county issued the bonds, and then we promised to pay that back with the tax increment generated by the new development.
So there's a period when the bondholders are just, they paid the principal out, but then they don't start getting payments until you start getting the tax increment coming in?
Bondholders don't like that.
They don't like that?
No, so we actually build in there's an interest reserve
Into
built
the
into the
bond.
issuance until the actual,
So
revenue
kind of
is
like
generated.
So in multifamily, I used to do multifamily bond deals. So you have the interest is in one of the expense items. And so you're paying the interest during the construction period. And then the tax increment money kicks in that pays off the bonds.
Yep.
Okay,
That's exactly
great.
right.
Any last question, and then we'll break for lunch? Yes, sir. Yes, no, Kent, yes.
He feels that about 40% of the home builders now have gone to prefabricated assembly, and that this has reduced the labor issue, has reduced some other weather problems. Is that a fair estimate? And the other thing we talked about is how we get more and more of the modular housing plants closer, more of them, so that it can be closer to the density and uniformity issues that you're talking about.
Let me do the second question, and I'll turn it back to you, Greg. So one of the things that came out of a dinner that I had 4 or 5 months ago, there's a company called QB that is doing what they call micro factories. So you have gigafactories, which is a term used for when you make chips and stuff. Well, the modular factories end up being quite large, and they need them for economy of scale, but that then creates a couple problems. You can't put them close together because they need the economy of scale, and you can only drive the stuff so far, and it's expensive. And so he came up with the concept, and they've tested it in Central Europe, and they're now testing it in all places, Las Vegas, on some of the BLM land that was sold under that 1998 act. And so the first microfactory, and the way I describe the microfactory is think of the tennis court with the big bubble. Well, this is a big bubble that's a factory, and it can be on site or close in the metropolitan area. And so your distances are in miles, not, whatever, or it's right on the site. And you build inside to the code. So so I call it factory built housing, but it's not modular per se. And you're actually delivering all of that, and it can all be inspected. It's all being built to the regular building codes, and it's all just in time. And you cut down on the amount of skilled labor that you need to do it. This has to be tested. As I said, they've done their first cases in Central Europe, but they've got this underway in the Las Vegas area, and that factory is supposed to be up and running, and I've gotten an invitation to come see it when it's up and running next year. So stay tuned. There are things, there was a conference Tobias and I were at yesterday. They were talking about another type of microfactory. And so there's some technology here that potentially could be brought to bear. So Greg, do you have anything to add on the first question?
Only that I'd be interested to hear more about the 40%. Because we haven't seen a lot of that yet. I think there's been the promise and the hope for prefabricated homes to increase affordability for modular homes.
Those seem to be the kind of figures that
keep coming up on the feedback from a lot of the small home builders, obviously, who are changing their lifestyle and bringing in the prefabricated components, not a modular unit. What we found in England when I was working with related over there on Brett Cross, the 40,000 unit in-house city, west of London, is they can't, except for the bathrooms, move those into the high-rise multifamily modules at a time. But it's coming.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a real opportunity there. We haven't seen it realized yet, but I do think there is an opportunity. And I think a lot of people are working on that because they see the opportunity. It's just how do we translate that into reality on the ground?
So let me try to we've got a bunch more questions that came in since I got up here. Are the handouts for today's events? The handouts will be found on the registration website. There should be links there along with the video of this event. Are we suggesting more sprawl that encourages more energy-intensive car dependency? Is that the answer? The answer is no. These are areas that are growing. You need more housing. We have suggested a series of things. We call them the playbook. We've suggested tearing down older, energy-inefficient homes that, again, they're perfectly useful homes, but because of the land prices, you can tear them down and build, 4 townhomes on a 8,000 square foot lot. And do the house price change that I mentioned, and improve the energy efficiency and be near amenities. We have livable urban villages is another thing. But this is an area where most of these areas don't have land prices throughout large swaths, except in California, Oregon, where the land prices are high enough that it justifies tearing down perfectly good structures that still have economic life. But if the land prices get high enough, then the economic, highest and best use is to tear it down. In many of these places, they're growing, and there's just not enough housing being built. They need more land because they're landlocked, largely because of BLM. And so we're saying, yes, we're going to be moving out in a judicious way, but we're going to be doing it at higher densities and more with much greater affordability than what was done in the past. Given the water regime out west, have we done an analysis of assured water supply? No, but we have looked at places like Las Vegas. Arthur and I did an op-ed in a Las Vegas newspaper back in, I think, December, where we talked about the efforts going on in Las Vegas. They've been reducing the amount of water that they're using, not only per capita, but in total amount. I think they actually had reduced the amount over the last 20 years. They're using less water total today than they were using 20 years ago. And so there's, those are things that have to be done at the, state and local level, but they certainly need to be looked at. But we know there's things going on out west. Could this initiative include smaller homes and apartments zoned for older people or limited budgets who desire peace and quiet, couples with a room for guest up? Again, how all that happens, we're basically focused on, look at to keep the numbers simple. If you build single-family detached on smaller houses, one of the things we suggested in North Dakota, you can do twin homes, which are basically 2 ranches that share 2 common walls, or it's not a common wall, to abut up against each other. You reduce the land by about 40%, you reduce the price by about 20%, and you get 2 homes, each with 3 bedrooms, 2 baths that butt up against each other. They're called twin homes. There's lots of different options. We're basically given a couple big options here. And we have focused on owner occupancy because we think that's an important point. When you build single family detached, again, we know what the numbers are place by place, but nationally you're looking at 90 to 95% owner occupancy, single family detached. This thing about all the single family homes are being rented is just a myth. It's just not happening around the country. We have all kinds of data that show that, but again, it's a great talking point, but it's just not. And I ran into the talking point in New Mexico. I run into everywhere I go, and it's a myth, literally a myth. In terms of large institutional home ownership. Yeah, mom and pop owns, a bunch of apartments and houses and stuff, but that's been that way for decades. And let's see, next question is, Insurers no longer want to insure homes that are built in urban wildland interface anymore. Again, that you have to build, again, I'm not an expert at this, but I do know that if you build to the fire codes, I'm more of an expert on hurricanes, having experienced some of that recently. And the building codes make homes fairly fire resistant. There's no such thing as a completely fire resistant home unless it's all concrete, I guess. But you can really, with the landscaping, the construction stuff, make a fairly fire resistant home. And keep the brush down and all of that. And so again, there are local codes, just like there are local codes that make it housing hurricane resistant up to 160 miles an hour, and the house comes through, without any damage, no flooding, except on the garage on the first floor. Water access I already mentioned for Las Vegas. Does the proposed housing include condos and apartments? Condos are a tricky thing. Condos as in condo buildings where you get condo liability laws. That's we could have a conference for 3 weeks on that. And so we've basically said, let's just ignore that for the time being. It's really a problem to build condos because of condo liability laws. On the other hand, the condo form of ownership, which is being used in places like, I think, Nashville and Palisades Park and other places in California, where you take 4 homes that look like a townhome, but they're actually a condo, and they have a little condominium regime around it, but there's no HOA, and they each own their spot, and you can do that. That's a form of home ownership, but condos as a way to build buildings runs into all kinds of liability laws, so we've kind of tried to avoid that. Let's see. Won't this effectively create entire cities of first-time homebuyers? No, the lottery is really for the home sweet home. Those 1.5 million, and we've said, well, half of the square mileage is for the lottery, the other half is for the rest of buyers. But the Freedom Cities, there isn't a lottery. That's a whole different story, because the developer has to basically have a runway over 40 to 50 years to develop. And so it's not restricted to first-time buyers. And even in the home sweet home, as I said, we wouldn't create little enclaves of first-time buyers. Now, if it's a townhouse is all in one spot, as you see in around Washington, then those could be a lot of first-time home buyers. But if you intersperse on this block or this side of the street is this, we see that all the time, where one side of the street has those twin homes and the other side of the street has single-family detached. And then you have single-family detached that 17 per acre, then you have single family attached with 12 per acre. You can intermix those in a neighborhood, and therefore you get a mix of, and that's the way things used to be. You get an economic integration, and we need to get back, I think, a natural economic integration based on house prices. Coming from a residential home builder in Montana, will there be additional systems to the city to get infrastructure? Again, we think that's where the governors come in, and they need to think about infrastructure. I've spoken in New Mexico, in Las Vegas, in Utah, Montana, North Dakota. Those are 5 Western states that I've spoken to just in the last 6 months. And there is a role for the governors to get involved here. We'll adjourn for lunch now. We don't have a speaker during lunch, so you have plenty of time to talk to each other and learn from each other. And I'll be here, and Arthur's here, Tobias is here, and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll let people continue filtering in, but we're going to go ahead and get started just about as soon as screen loads. My name is Arthur Gales. I'm the manager of housing supply initiatives at the AI Housing Center.
And I'm Jeffrey Mason. I'm head of policy at the Charter Cities Institute.
Great. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started with our presentation. Ed's talked a lot about policy, and we've heard about some of the practical concepts in terms of developing these homes. But what I'd like to do is go a little bit into how we select sites for the Freedom Cities, what this land actually looks like, and where it's located. There we go. You've seen this slide already, but I just want to recap the bidding a little bit. We're talking here for 3 million homes. 1.5 million there is Home Sweet Home, which has gone through in a lot of detail, and that's about 250 square miles of BLM land. Initiative 2, which we're going to go into some more detail about, is Freedom Cities, which is the other 1.5 million homes, and that's on about 600 square miles of land. So the first thing we'll notice is it takes a little bit more than twice as much land to build homes in these Freedom Cities as it does via Home Sweet Home. And there's a very simple reason for that. With Home Sweet Home areas, we're taking them directly adjacent to residential homes that already exist. So we're just kind of building out the housing linearly from an area that's already fully built out. With Freedom Cities, these are, at least hypothetically, structured to be entirely new economies and communities. So Freedom Cities will need, in addition to roads, they'll need businesses, amenities, governments, all the things that come with cities. And so in terms of just how many houses you have per acre, it's just going to be a little bit less. So just starting with the overall footprint of BLM land, these are the 10 states that we're focusing on here: Arizona, California, Colorado, Idaho, Montana, New Mexico, Nevada, Oregon, Utah, and Wyoming. The federal government in general owns about half of the total area of these 10 states, and the BLM owns about a quarter of it. So it's really a massive footprint in terms of land ownership. And it's these and Alaska are, I think, over 97% of the BLM's total land. So there really is a lot to work with. And as Ed went over, the BLM does have the authority to sell small-ish, not really that small, parcels of 2,500 acres or less of their own volition. Above that, they have to submit any sale to Congress, but 2,500 acres at 10 homes an acre is 25,000 homes. So they could do a 25,000 home, a sale of land that's enough for 25,000 homes administratively. One of the big questions we get about BLM land, and we've got it a few times today, is can you actually build in the land that the BLM owns? You can take a look at this map of the topology and elevation in the US, and you see a lot of this land is mountainous and it's very arid compared to the East Coast, the middle of the country, and the West Coast. With that said, our proposal only needs 0.3% of the total BLM land in order to be able to achieve the 3 million homes that we propose. That's a very small slice of land, and it's perfectly feasible even after taking into account the land you can't build on. About a quarter of that is just mountainous. It's literally difficult to build on. 4% of the quote unquote land that the BLM manages is water. And another 15% is declared as conservation land by the president or Congress. And that still leaves us with about half of the land where you could plausibly build a structure on. Okay. So starting with Home Sweet Homes, this is an area that we mapped out just outside of Bend, Oregon, where I think the median home price in Bend Metro is something like $600,000. Price to income is about 6 to 1. They have a real affordability problem and they have a supply problem. These are areas where they can build. And the important facet of this is that we map our Home Sweet Home areas around areas where we know there are single family homes. And we specifically look at single-family homes on relatively small lots, less than a quarter acre. And that matters because it means that there's almost certainly a sewer system already plugged into those lots. And so really when you expand outward, you can do that gradually and know that there's going to be enough supply and not, by development standards, not a super high lift to start going out from those areas. You can see here with the properties in pink, they're building all along the edge. And it's really just the federal ownership of the lands that we have in the purple through yellow squares that prevents them from being built on. We can see this boundary effect if we zoom in to this BLM parcel in Las Vegas, where we have homes that have been developed all around this parcel, and they've been developed at fairly dense ratios. And the only thing that stops these from continuing westward is this parcel on which it's illegal to build. You can see at kind of the top of the picture, the homes continue to go westward in this picture. It's only in this parcel where they've been stopped. And this neighborhood is interesting because it's built at almost exactly the density that Ed was proposing from earlier, which in this case is about 3,000 square feet. We talk about almost 3,200 square feet on average. And this particular neighborhood happens to be fairly homogeneous in its development topology. These are all single-family detached homes. They're almost exactly 3,000 square foot lots. But that doesn't have to be the case. Tushar asked a question earlier about what about townhomes? What about homes that are at 1,800 square feet? That's great. If we do a ratio, a diversity of developments, then we create a range of price points that's going to be beneficial for people who are searching out for starter homes in these areas. And just to get a feel for what this looks like, this parcel is about the same size as this neighboring community that, again, is at roughly the densities we're proposing. There's still space for what looks like an HOA and a pool in the center. And it's got about, if I recall correctly, about 500 homes within it. And this parcel would be enough to build 1,000 homes because it's about 100 acres. And this is just an example of what the homes in that neighborhood look like. They're perfectly viable single-family homes. This one's got a GLA of about 1,800 square feet, and the estimate for this home is $450,000. This was taken from the direct center, but the homes in this community range from $390,000 to about $475,000. So they're really at a fairly decent price point for Las Vegas as a metro. And if they were to allow townhomes, something like an 80-20 split of single-family detached to townhomes, you would get lower prices. Our analysis indicates that it would be about 18% lower for townhomes based on areas where townhomes and single-family detached are built together. So you can decrease the price point. And once you're talking about 18% cheaper than this range, you get into the $320 to $350 range of prices that's really affordable for most workforce households. And then I want to go through Freedom Cities a little bit. We took a look at all of the developable BLM land and we narrowed it down further than that. So in order to construct a Freedom City, we use entirely BLM land. And it's BLM land between 10 to 100 square miles. That's uninterrupted developable space. And just to give you a context for what that size is, 10 square miles is about Santa Monica in California. It's a few of the city, Newport in Rhode Island. And 100 square miles, you get up to areas like Philadelphia, which is about 134. Then we make sure as I said, this has to be all developable land or water. And we narrow down to only the Freedom Cities that are in existing metro areas, which you can think of as commuting zones. These are areas where there are jobs, where there are people already living by definition, and it excludes some of the BLM land that's kind of way out in areas where nobody is even close to. We make sure that any Freedom City is within 10 miles entirely of a highway and within 50 miles of an airport, which is a fairly decent distance by US city standards. And then we also make sure that there's at least 2 square miles of high quality water nearby. So that's lakes, rivers, and clean reservoirs. And we just base that threshold on the cities that are in these 10 states, whatever the lowest amount I think is about 2 in Santa Fe. And so we take that as a standard. I'm not going to get too much into the water issue, except to say that one, it's above my pay grade. And two, we observe, Ed mentioned this earlier, in Las Vegas, they recycle roughly 98% of the indoor water that they use. And they estimate that they have capacity to roughly double their population over the next 30 years. They don't know where they're going to get the housing. That's what all this is about. But they are able to keep the water going for a lot more people than they have. They have the capacity. Other Freedom Cities that are built along this range will have to navigate the legal rights issues that we won't get into here. But they also will need to follow good policy and follow the example of places like Las Vegas in conserving the water that they use, because it is a scarce resource in these areas. And then from there, once we do all that narrowing down, we find 400 total Freedom Cities that are possible within BLM land of these sizes. So quite a lot. Where our proposal for 1.5 million homes is based on just taking 20 of those that we could possibly build. And we've done a preliminary ranking of the kind of most valuable sites where they might be listed in each state. And that value varies. There are a lot of very valuable locations in the Las Vegas metro, right near the Las Vegas city. And there are areas in, say, Wyoming, where the existing land is a little bit less valuable. And we do control for that, Ed mentioned this earlier, by reducing the size of the recommended Freedom Cities in the states with lower populations. So in Wyoming, Idaho, New Mexico, we don't propose Freedom Cities that are quite as large as the ones you might build in Nevada, where the demand is much higher for homes there. But you can look at this list of the metros where we're able to cite Freedom Cities. We see Riverside, Bend, Phoenix, Las Vegas, Boise in Idaho, Salt Lake, Grand Junction in Colorado, which is towards the west, Billings, Montana, and then Albuquerque and Cody in Wyoming. All of these metros have documented affordability problems. Even in the ones that are lower priced, that's still the case. So you can see here on this chart, the median home value in Albuquerque Metro is only $340,000. In Las Vegas Metro, that's a steal. But if you look at Bend, by comparison, it's $700,000 or $640,000, and it's much more expensive. On a price to income ratio, though, Wyoming is still at 5-to-1. The typical standard for a family purchasing a house is 3-to-1. They still don't have enough homes at the median to support their median income. And so these Freedom Cities in each state can be very valuable for taking some of the pressure off of rising home prices generally. That's particularly concerned in a lot of the states that have seen a large influx of domestic migration and concurrent home price rises over the past half decade to 10 years. We can see here the incoming migration map for Phoenix Metro and Las Vegas Metro, where two of our Freedom Cities are cited. Phoenix Metro got 25,000 people last year. Las Vegas got 15,000. If you repeat that every year, you start to get a real pressure on your home prices throughout the metro area. And we've gone to both of those areas at AEI. We talked to people who are around, and inevitably we hear somebody who's moving 2 hours out of Phoenix City so that they can find a home that they can actually afford to buy. What Freedom Cities can do is take the pressure off that in two ways. First, it can act as a catchment area for people who are looking to move out of areas like Phoenix City, like Las Vegas City, and somewhere where they can find a more affordable home. But two, it can make for a destination for the people who are already fleeing California in droves and moving to states like Arizona and Nevada. Okay, so we can see here kind of the site that we have for two potential Freedom Cities in each of these states. The one on the left is in the Las Vegas Metro and the one on the right in the Phoenix Metro. And you can see in Las Vegas, one of the Freedom Cities is immediately adjoining North Las Vegas. It's something of a mirror city for North Las Vegas. And so this isn't somewhere that's totally out in the boondocks where nobody could imagine building an infrastructure. It's right next to where we already have it. It's simply illegal to constitute a city there, but there's nothing practically preventing it from being the case. There's one farther out to the west. It's near a town called Mesquite, and that's about an hour drive away from Las Vegas, which is relatively far. But if we're thinking about building communities in these areas, that's still a relatively acceptable price to pay. I should mention that in all these cases, we rank our Freedom Cities by the number of jobs that are within 10 miles. And so for Phoenix, Arizona, for Las Vegas Metro, the one that you can see here immediately adjoining North Las Vegas has about 100,000 jobs that are within 10 miles that can really support a community. And all of these have at least about 1,000 jobs that are available, and many of them have far more than that. So these aren't exactly starting from nothing. In addition to being developable, they also in general have some sort of activity going on around where they're located. The ones in Phoenix you can see on the right are kind of adjoining each side of the metro area, and they're roughly in line with that general commuting radius. Plenty of people live out. You can see there are cities further out to the northwest of Phoenix than what we've mapped here, and that's also true in the southeast. Okay. And I'll wrap up my bit of this by just saying that we have now released the Homesteading 2.0 app, which is kind of the one-stop shop for all the data that we have available on this land. You can see all the Freedom Cities, all the Homestead 2.0 maps, anything that you're curious about, and we will be sharing these out to people in these locations who are curious about where this BLM land can actually be sold, where it can be sited, and where it can build homes. I showed you a sample earlier. We have the top two. I won't go through all the different examples of Freedom Cities, but you can see we have the top 20 mapped out here in our slides on all of these different states. If you look up the slides online, or if you go to the web map after this conference. With that, Jeff.
Thank you, Arthur.
Thank you.
Get pulled up here in a sec. Thank you very much. So I'm Jeffrey Mason. I'm at the Charter Cities Institute. We're a think tank based here in DC. We primarily work on new urban developments, special economic zones, and issues of urban economies, urban governance, mostly in emerging markets. Most of our work to date has been in Africa, a little bit in Latin America, a little bit in India, Central Asia as well. And we've always been interested in, should there be the right opportunity to focus on something here at home, that's something that we'd be interested in pursuing. And up until now, we really didn't feel like there was that opportunity. So in 2023, Donald Trump, in a sort of campaign speech, among a list of other ideas, throughout this idea of freedom cities. And then this is 2023, kind of forgot about it for a while. And then as after the election and the administration was starting to come together, we thought, okay, there's some real potential here to maybe push something on this front and potentially build some new cities in the United States, and potentially to couple that with some interesting regulatory opportunities to advance frontier technologies. So I'll talk a little bit about that, but first I want to start with some sort of broader context about this idea of new cities. As we've heard throughout the day, that we have a little bit of experience with this in the United States, but it's still a relatively foreign concept. So I want to talk about some of the broader context. I hope you're not tired of maps yet, because I have more. So this is a map from it's a Dutch research group called the International New Towns Institute. I forget they used to be published online. They don't have their inclusion criteria online anymore. But this is a map of new towns and cities planned worldwide since 1900 to 2020. We have our own version of this map, but the population cutoff is 100,000 or more. And this is a little more granular. The U.S. would be pretty bare on our map. So I thought this would be more useful to show you. So this is an entire 120-year period. And you can see there's more going on, elsewhere in the world over this time period. But we have some. So let's look at the last roughly 50 years. This is 1975 to 2020. And you can see a lot of the U.S. Points on this map drop off, but a lot of the bullet points elsewhere in the maps remain. And right, there's a couple of reasons why we should probably expect this is the case. The U.S. is over this period became essentially as urbanized as it's going to be. We're going to have some rural to urban migration, some city to city migration, but in the grand scheme of things, this is pretty marginal. Even the massive outflow, in a global perspective, even the massive outflow from California is pretty marginal. When in some of these countries we're talking about, a million people moving from rural to urban areas just on an annual basis. So we shouldn't be totally surprised that the number of sort of new towns and cities is starting to fall off. And as Ed talked about as well, right, with the sort of creation of modern zoning, that's another reason probably I think why we should expect that more of these sort of new towns just weren't possible. Purely from a legal perspective, if not an economic perspective. Let's jump forward a little more. So this is the past 20 years. And based on the data that they've collected, that one little dot is, I believe that's Treasure Island, the redevelopment of Treasure Island in San Francisco. So again, depending on what you count or choose not to count, there hasn't been a lot that is considered a new city that has been started in the United States in the past 20 years. So I think that's some important sort of global context on new cities. A second piece of context that I want to talk about are special jurisdictions. So special economic zones, other types of unique forms of governance arrangements that sort of apply to a specific sector or a specific limited geographic area. They've had a lot of use in a lot of places for a lot of different reasons. But one thing that obviously stands out on this map is that in the United States, we've really only done foreign trade zones. This is basically just a map of seaports and airports. There's not really any kind of governance innovation going on in these jurisdictions compared to some of the other colors that you find in other places. And we have some elements of place-based policies that I'll talk about in a little bit, with this idea of sort of taking, okay, here's a limited geographic area, and to achieve a specific end, we might apply some special rules to that jurisdiction. That's also a relatively novel concept for the United States. And we've talked about some of these examples already throughout history. Reston, Columbia, Irvine was privately developed. The Woodlands is one of the biggest that sort of explicitly is a new city. But then in special jurisdictions, like I said, this isn't really something we've done. And the closest thing we have in the United States to a special economic zone or a charter city, whatever you would want to call it, is actually probably Disney World. So in 1967, the state government of Florida created a special district called the Reedy Creek Improvement District. And it was essentially a municipal government, control of which was based on land ownership. Disney owned all or 99% of the land, something like that, within this district. So that was Disney's charter city, effectively. And in Walt's original conception, Epcot was supposed to be a place where 20,000 people were going to live. But after he passed, that vision wasn't carried out. But yeah, this is sort of and it's pretty orthogonal, but the closest thing we have to some kind of special innovative district in the United States, and that was killed off 2 or 3 years ago by the government of Florida and reorganized. So with that sort of context out of the way, let's talk about freedom cities. So Ed, Arthur, and their team have talked quite a bit about the housing, where this land could be, some of the mapping. I'll talk about some additional, in brief, some additional possibilities in addition to sort of BLM land, and then what some of the regulatory opportunities might be as well. But I do think that this initiative, depending on how it's implemented, could hold some serious promise for reshoring industry and advancing frontier technologies in sectors like aeronautics, energy, and biotech. So we already talked about 10 Western states. This is where most of the viable BLM land is, and Arthur's done some great work identifying where those sites are, what those look like. But so depending on what you're looking at for land, there's also some very interesting DOD, EPA, and other federal sites that potentially expand the scope of what you could look at. And this includes everything from sort of out-of-commissioned bases all the way to things like the Presidio in California, which you may have seen recently. The president is probably going to be reconstituting the Presidio Trust in San Francisco in some form. So in addition to the BLM land, there's a lot of other interesting opportunities as well. And then also there's the possibility of, as I think Ed mentioned, state land or even opting in private land to this type of structure. That obviously unlocks an unlimited number of possibilities. That brings places like Texas into play, and other states where I think there'd be strong synergies with growing economies and potentially supportive governments. But I think regardless of what kind of land you're looking at, the inclusion of it being federal land where some of the local controls on what you can build, how you can build it, not applying or being more limited in scope, this is an exciting opportunity to build the places that Americans seem to indicate that they want to live. We talked about, right, what are the most expensive places in this area? Right, it's Georgetown, it's Alexandria. Lots of people, if we take prices, at their meaning, a lot more people would like to live at these places like this, but can't. And so I think there's an interesting opportunity, not just to do more housing, but to potentially build the kind of urban forms, both these sort of pre-car type things, but even the sort of streetcar suburbs that people are also very fond of. There's an interesting opportunity to recapture some of this urban form on a large scale. This has been done in piecemeal bits in different places. Some of you may know, for example, cul-de-sac in Tempe. They did a car-free community there. There's some interesting developments recently in Charleston. Like these like neighborhood level developments. But there's, I think, a really potentially very good opportunity to do these on a town or city scale on some of this land that Arthur and others have identified. And sort of build more of these towns that Americans would say they would like to live, but either on one end are too expensive, and even if you can afford the house, odds are it's in a place where the city services are not something that you might want to participate in with the schools or something like that. Or on the other end, there's lots of great urbanism scattered throughout, say, the Rust Belt, but those aren't economically vibrant places. So even if they're affordable and sort of have good urban bones, there's reasons why you might not want to move there as well, even if this is in the kind of place you would like to live. And so I think this idea of freedom cities and potentially pursuing not just as housing, but as an opportunity for some regulatory innovation sits well, I think, within this sort of emerging context of a sort of new place-based policy playbook. So there's been things that have been done in recent years. Opportunity zones was one of the key pieces of the TCJA a couple of years ago. Institute for Progress has this interesting idea they published a few weeks ago, looking at BLM land for what they've called special compute zones for data center infrastructure. There's been some of these different like real estate, like EB5, things like that. There are all these different sort of piecemeal place-based policies that target achieving some kind of outcome in some way. And so I think the opportunity here is you can create a structure by which, coordinated either by the White House or say through Department of Interior. I think there's options as to what the sort of right coordinating authority is. But you could establish a structure and say, okay, in this Freedom City, in addition to the housing and things that we would like to build, we would also like to make this a jurisdiction that is more permissible for, say, drones and vertical takeoff and landing companies. And you can work then through that structure with DOT to say, hey, these are the regulations that companies in this sector believe are holding back their development and bringing products to market. How about not countrywide, but let's say within this Freedom City, within this jurisdiction, we would like to amend or relax these specific regulations and allow for some more trial and error, some more experimentation. And DOT could come back and create that structure by which, okay, in this jurisdiction, we're going to allow this. And some forms of exist in pieces, right? There's this, I think it's in Idaho, the nuclear laboratory facility where like nuclear companies can come and set up in a specific area to try things out. So I think you can create those structures and to potentially create some clusters, not just one-offs, but clusters for these industries in places that are sort of more greenfield. And you're not just saying, okay, here's an existing city, like it or not, we're gonna do more expansive drone testing or more biomedical innovation or something like that here. But we're talking about new places, so you get around a little bit of some of those political economy problems. But I think the agglomeration effects are also really important. It's hard to build a new city if you don't have jobs. And as Arthur talked about with some of these sites, they're in proximity to a good number of jobs. But if you want to pursue a site that is a little more greenfield in its nature, then you need a good anchor tenant or multiple anchor tenants. You need a gigafactory or two or something like that to set up. and create demand, solve this chicken and egg problem. To have, okay, we want to hire 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people at this site. We're going to build the housing. We're building these facilities, and that I think opens up more possibilities for Freedom City sites as well, so as not to be wholly reliant just on the existing job market. And this is something that we've worked on a lot in our work that we've done abroad, instead of focusing on in the growth path of existing cities. Right, you can tap that infrastructure to some extent, you can tap that labor market to some extent, but to really build something that is truly scalable, ideally you need strong anchor tenants to be able to do that. And then so depending on the size and scope of a particular Freedom City proposal, right, you can target something, okay, this is going to be for a specific sector. So let's say the president says, yes, we want to do the Presidio in San Francisco as a Freedom City. Right, that's a small area, it's a very urban area, and given where it is, right, maybe the right focus is sort of as a biotech cluster, rather than say drones or energy. But in some of these Western states, right, maybe the more appropriate focus is on energy. So right, where we're going to do expedited geothermal, other things like that. And then, of course, the alternative, depending again on the location and the contours of the site, is you can also do a more broad-based approach. So hey, we're not going to restrict this to specifically one sector. We want this to be a broadly innovative hub for frontier technologies, for housing, to create jobs. I think something like that probably requires a larger site. But all this to say, I think there's a lot of options at the end of the day, with how you actually on the ground try to implement something like a Freedom City. And to the extent that you do some kind of regulatory innovation, what that could look like. And I'll just add that I think also that it would be incredibly useful as well as a tool, not just for creating homes and advancing frontier technologies, but in its regulatory point, but also building a better and more effective regulatory system. Agencies and places learn by doing and experimenting. And if you could say, okay, we're going to try out something a little lighter touch here, and it works, you can then scale that up and say, okay, we're happy with this. We're comfortable taking this to a larger area or rolling out something that we tried here nationwide. And I think that's a very promising path forward for building a regulatory state. And that's really what I mean, I think, by Freedom Cities as a second best. Ideally, right, YIMBY would have triumphed, and it would cost $300 to live in Lower Manhattan, right? And ideally, we would already be having flying cars and we'd have a moon base already, right? So I think we need to come up with some alternatives. So that's why I say Freedom Cities as a second best. Ideally, we solve these problems head on. We know that's easier said than done. And so we think this is potentially a good avenue to get around some of those difficult and thorny both policy and political problems. And while I think this is sort of tends to be coded as a more sort of right of center thing, I think there's actually an interesting opportunity for bipartisan consensus on Freedom Cities and Homesteading 2.0, and not just rooted in the Western states either. So you see here, Congressman Jake Alkencloss, Democrat from Massachusetts. He was recently on Ezra Klein's podcast and talked about we have these military bases in his district that are defunct. Let's build housing on them. And the Boston area, that could be huge. These are, I don't know exactly how big, but relatively large sites where you could build thousands of units, and something of that scale actually can have an effect on sort of regional prices. And then on sort of the regulatory side, right, Mike Lee, Ed talked about earlier, he's introduced the Homes Act. Something else that he's done in recent years, something called the Pioneer Act, and this idea of creating regulatory sandboxes at the federal level, mirroring what Utah and some other states have done for specific sectors for state level regulation. And so I think depending on exactly how this is structured, how it's packaged, what would be ultimately required in legislation, I think there's more bipartisan potential for this than folks might originally think. I don't think you'll get everybody, right? But I think you could actually get a solid core of both Republicans and Democrats who could find this appealing, both for whatever reasons that whether it's housing affordability, economic growth and innovation, whatever they care about most. There's a little bit of something for everybody here. So in sort of short, in terms of legislation, where we kind of we're working on some draft legislation on this right now, and based on the conversations that we've had, what we kind of see as sort of the immediate path forward. The easiest wins being focusing on housing and energy. Right, I think we almost got permitting reform a few months back. You know, I think there's a growing consensus about that. Housing, obviously, number one. So I think at sort of bare minimum, something that sort of pairs these things together would be one. I think would be more impactful than probably anything else you could do. And two is also probably the most politically feasible. And then I think, you know, starting at that baseline, then I think you can start to explore opportunities for some kind of regulatory opt-outs or sandboxes, this more expansive version of Freedom Cities, more permitting, some sort of incentives for onshoring, these other types of more specifically regulatory tools focused on, like I said, emerging technologies and bringing industry back, and figuring out what the appropriate federal structure for that would be. Right, if you're just doing housing, right, you don't really need a coordinating authority for this, right? The land's being sold off and developed or done by long-term lease. But administratively, that's also an easier leap, but we do think something could be done. So that sort of in short is at TCI, and we're also working, I have a link there, a group called the Frontier Foundation. This is just in brief how kind of we're thinking about sort of new cities, this idea of special jurisdictions, regulatory innovation here at home. We have a white paper that we've published that details our thinking on some of these things in a little more depth, and happy to share with anyone who's interested. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jeff and Arthur. Before we get to questions both from the audience and online, I wanted to just step back a bit and sort of explain how the two pieces of Homesteading 2.0, the Home Sweet Home and the Freedom Cities work together. Freedom Cities are a long-term build-out. It takes time before the first houses are even ready to occupy. You're talking years, not 10 years, but you know, it's a number of years before the first one gets ready for people to start moving in to the first sort of village or neighborhood. The Home Sweet Home, we think, is an opportunity in states and localities that are ready to answer the challenge to move very quickly. Because as Arthur has demonstrated, these are areas that desperately need housing. Much of the facilities are already there, and you're just extending housing in logical places where it needs to be, and you're going to do it at price points that's going to be much more accessible to the people that are already living there and the economic growth that's happening in these areas. And so there is an advantage to having a piece that's rapid, relatively speaking, even though it plays out over 10 to 20 years, and then a second piece that plays out literally over 40 to 50 years. And so that's part of the logic, and I've already explained the logic of the lottery also has logic to it from a number of different perspectives, just gauging demand for particular subdivisions, explaining to builders and cities and others that this demand is really there, and these houses are going to get sold, et cetera, and the price points work and all of that. So there's at a high level, this stuff all fits together in that respect. So to the questions, why don't we take a couple questions from the audience here? I'll wait for the mic, please. Any questions? Yes, Joe?
Yeah, Ed, one of the questions I wanted to ask, actually, the previous panel with Mike, the engaging, very optimistic developer that gives me hope that if there's more people like that, maybe we can get
You should meet his dad. He's really
something like this done. San Antonio, which is not Houston, I've been shown a lot of homes there that are brand new, being built, small lots, very affordable and stuff like that.
Why are they doing it and why aren't other areas building smaller, more affordable single-family homes?
Great
And
question.
the question is it federal restrictions or is it state and local?
The short answer is state and local. Great question. So, and we hear a lot of different answers. Oh, there's no demand for those homes. That's just BS. Excuse me. It's just not true. And Tobias, we've done a complete study on Seattle. In 1998, Seattle came up with livable urban villages. They said, we don't know if this is going to work. We don't know if any developers are going to build any homes. We're just going to put this zoning thing in place. They basically reduced lot size down to 1,500, 16, whatever, 6 square feet, whatever it was, from whatever it was. You could split a lot into pieces that were 1,600 square feet. Basically, townhomes or very small side lot, single family detached. And over the course of 20 plus years, they built 20,000 homes, and they all sold. Developers just were gaga over doing it, and they all sold. You hear the same thing about townhomes. You know, oh, there's no demand for townhomes. That's an excuse. That's the same NIMBY excuse. They'll take any port that they can find as an excuse. Second of all, the localities have all kinds of excuses. In fact, there's a question here. Maintaining the infrastructure of sprawl is bankrupting municipalities across the country. How do you address that, or you just kick the can down the road? So as we said, most single-family development that's done at 1 home per acre is a loss leader. You can't make money on real estate taxes at 1 home per acre, even if the home sells for $1 million. But again, if you can build $6 or $7 million worth of real estate on that and collect real estate taxes on $6 or $7 million, that's a big difference. And if that then brings commercial development, and we have a whole bunch of ideas, walkable urban development, livable urban villages, et cetera, that would allow both of those things to happen in concert. I was just looking at a place, Bedford at Falls River in Raleigh, that got built in the last 15 years or so. They built 1,700 homes on, I forget how many acres it was. So that's like 5,000 people. And it was built about 15 years ago. By and large, it's been building out or filling out. And you drive through it, it's one of these new urbanism type developments. The trees are fully grown. The streets all have sidewalks. The front yards are very small. The side yards are small. It's got a community center. It's got a swimming pool. It's got some commercial. They could have more commercial, but that can be adjusted. It has townhomes. It has small lots. It has larger lots. It's got a complete mix. There's one outside of Nashville that's like that. These could be built that way, both in terms of Freedom Cities and in terms of Home Sweet Home. But back to Texas. So it started in Houston. Houston, at the same time Seattle did its change, it reduced with the 10 by 10 mile area centered on downtown Houston. People think of Houston as just sprawl. It is not true. They also say, well, Houston doesn't have zoning. It doesn't have zoning. That just means it doesn't have zones. It has lots of land use regulation, but they're just not called zoning. But they had a minimum lot size, and the minimum lot size was something like 5,500 square feet, give or take. They changed it in that 10 by 10 mile area to 1,600 square feet, whatever the number is. And all of a sudden, there's an explosion of housing that gets built. Just an explosion. We have a case study on that Mercatus did, Emily Hamilton, and we've done some work on it also, but she did the definitive work on it, and Rice University did some definitive work on it. That then got expanded to the entire city of Houston. And then Austin adopted that a year and a half ago. And now there's a bill in the state legislature that has, I think, the optimism that it will pass, but it's very tailored. So, and we worked with the group Texas for Reasonable Solutions, I think, and we gave them a lot of data to support. We said, look, let's focus on new greenfield subdivisions. Texas builds a lot of housing. You can try to fight the battle of the teardowns, but then you get the NIMBYs, the NIMBYs on that. On the other hand, if you focus on the greenfield subdivisions, those don't have any residents yet. They haven't been built. And so, but a lot of new subdivisions get built in Texas. Why don't you start having smaller lots by right in those subdivisions? Builders will take advantage of that if it's by right. And they said, okay, great idea. We gave them the data. They said, okay, we're going to focus on these. I forget how many counties. I'm going to say 12 counties, larger urban, more populated counties. And then within those, they're going to focus on the larger cities. And so it's tailored very much to the more populated counties. This is the second most populated state in the country. And then the cities in those areas. And then they're defining a new I forget how many acres it is, but it's not an acre. It's got to be, I forget how many acres. And then they say in those areas, there is by right, you can build on small lots. It's up to the owner of the property to decide, not the city. Cities are very bad at picking these things. The builders have their finger on the pulse, and if they make a mistake, it's kind of, they've got the money at risk. And so that bill is wending its way through. The legislature in Texas meets for a relatively short period of time. I think they're up sometime in the next week or 2 or 3. We'll see what happens to it. But it's a very tailored bill that would make this available statewide. And Connecticut has a light touch density bill that also targets greenfield because it's illegal to build starter homes, literally, in Connecticut. You can build 1 acre homes, half-acre homes. You can build high rises in transportation core areas that are very expensive. You cannot build nothing in between. We looked, there are virtually no townhomes that have been built in Connecticut in the last 20 years. That is not a choice of builders. It's because it's illegal, or it hasn't been made legal. So I hope that answers your question.
Could I add just a little bit to that?
Sure.
So we've done about 24 case studies on this now, and I say we when Ed and Tobias do all the work, but we've done about 24 of these case studies. And one of the ways that we can tell that it's a local restriction is that cities will often deregulate portions of their area within their boundaries. Tobias did a study of Denver, which upzoned a lot of their city in about 2010. And we can see very clearly that the distribution of properties within that zone are completely different from the ones that are a block over and outside the legal boundary. There's a similar story that we looked at in Anaheim, where they allowed residential developments up to 5 stories within about a 1 square mile radius. And in 20 years, that entire community got redeveloped. It was redeveloped to such an extent that they built half of the entire housing of that city in 1% of its area, because that's just the only area where it was legal and simple to do so.
So we've actually come up with what we call our housing success sequence. The housing success sequence is if you have by right zoning, by right meanings you don't need any administrative approval, there's no planning commission, there's no city council, there's no neighborhood meetings. You by right can build X, and X allows light touch density, number 1. Number 2, if you keep it simple, stupid regulations, or keep it short and simple, if you want to keep it KISS, and you have that in place, we find that if it's economically viable to build, and you put those 2 steps in place, every place we've studied, that there has been a swarm of housing that gets built starting very rapidly. The only time it doesn't happen is if it's not viable to build, or if they didn't actually make it by right, or they didn't implement KISS. But if you do those 2 things, you will get a unleashing of the swarm. And that's just what we've done 27 or 28 of these studies, and that's what we found. Let me go somewhere else, and I'll come back to you.
Arlington, Virginia, which is the epicenter for a botched up missing middle. And I believe missing middle, the term was wrong, because what's happening in Arlington, they're taking a 1 lot and they're making 2 McMansions and stuff like that. And they're missing the whole thing about the entry level starter homes and stuff like that. So I think your homesteading would be great. And I recommend the chambers. I'm also on the local chamber of commerce. The chambers are going to have to do some advocacy work on this at the local level, because everything percolates bottom up. But what you guys are, your idea is really a better way of doing what the proponents of missing middle were trying to doing, because missing middle is not doing what
what was intended, at least in Arlington, Virginia. Thank you.
Thank you. Question over here. Yes, sir. Yep.
Thanks all again. Super interesting. Thank you. Question is so if I'm understanding you correctly, the big kind of value add for Freedom Cities, its kind of unique selling point is the deregulatory nature of it, right? You can avoid a lot of the status quo regulations.
And that could be zoning
or in terms
other,
of
yeah,
growth,
either or both,
business,
yeah.
et cetera, right? Could you, given that your Home Sweet Home proposal is also on currently unincorporated federal land, as long as that isn't annexed into the adjoining municipality, why couldn't you do the same thing there in terms of having a deregulatory environment? Why does this need to be kind of an hour away from the established metro?
So that's a great question. So what percentage of Home Sweet Home is within city limits? It's a relatively small percentage.
Yeah, I'd say 10%.
10%. So 90% is outside of existing city limits, but it's adjacent, it's pretty close to existing city limits. The process that one does go through, and again, this is going to be local and state option, many times the unincorporated county, which is where the land is, which has zoning authority, because it's unincorporated, wants it to be annexed to the city to provide the services. And so again, it's, as Arthur said, that's kind of above the pay grade that we're at to try to figure this stuff out. But those are the kinds of issues that one gets. We're hoping that, again, by saying the federal government, hopefully saying, look, we're going to allocate up to 250 square miles, in these different states. First come, first served. The first states that put, along with the localities that put the pieces in place, you're going to get to go first. And you other state, you're dragging your feet. You may be in year 7, but if you're ready to go tomorrow, we're ready to move tomorrow. If you can put the stuff in place, and our hope is there's some governors that say, hey, yeah, we want to be first. We want to get a little sort of entrepreneurial juices flowing among governors, and they get into a little bit of competition. So that's a hope. We do have a couple questions. One for you, Arthur. What percent of Freedom Cities are located on the border of 2 states? That's the question. I know we do have Texas, for whatever reason, there's a lot of state land in Texas, but there isn't any BLM land particularly. But we do have, I forget the name of the place in New Mexico that's on the border of Texas. And so there's a lot of land in New Mexico, but there's none right across the border, a mile away, or just literally across the border in Texas. Can you talk about which ones are on borders and things like that?
I don't have a percentage, but it depends on the state. So in Oregon, for example, which is one of the higher priced areas, they're mostly in and around the Bend metro. They're not by and large concentrated on its state borders. That's also true in Idaho. It's true in Las Vegas, where most of the Freedom Cities are in Las Vegas metro or in the Reno, Carson City area. In California, they tend to be farther westward, although there's some outside of Bakersfield. And in New Mexico, in Arizona, they're also concentrated around Phoenix. And in New Mexico, there are some on the border with Texas, but they tend to be farther into the center of the city and, the center of the state and around Albuquerque, Santa Fe.
I do know we have the one south of Lake Havasu, which is on the border of Arizona and California. And the land is in Arizona, but it is close to the California border. But there isn't any land on the California side of the border. So the land is the land. And so we take the land pretty much as we find it. We didn't say, hey, exclude it because it is or isn't on a border. We just looked at where the land was. And if it happens to be on both sides of the border, fine. But in general, it's within a state, not necessarily very close to a border.
I should have added Utah has some that's on the border, but it's near St. George, which is relatively high priced. And furthermore, there's just 400 of these. So as a ballpark guess, I'll say 20% of them happen to be at state borders. Some of that land is already near development, some of it isn't, but we have a preliminary ranking methodology that we use to select sites that are in the most valuable areas that will be updated based on feedback we get from different parties. But in general, there's no lack of this land away from state borders.
There's a question maybe for you, Jeff. If a premise for Freedom Cities is industry related, who decides what industry and what voice do the residents have?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think in terms of what industries you'd be looking at, like I said, I think there's kind of two broad approaches. One is sort of a more general look. We'd like to create this environment, this Freedom City targeting multiple industries, and in which case you could say, okay, these are some of our priority sectors that are important, say, to national security or sort of frontier technologies, perhaps the areas where we're in most direct competition. Let's say China, sort of some sort of way to come up with, okay, here's some priority sectors. Let's focus on these things. Obviously, that's going to require some degree of discretion, which maybe we don't like. But I think in some sense that's a little bit inevitable. The other alternative, of course, like I said before, is having a specific industry tied to a specific site. And so that could be because the geography is particularly favorable to a specific industry. I'd be interested actually to see overlay the like potential for geothermal map over the maps that Arthur has put together, and see how some of those sites line up as well. Because then you could say have clusters that are focused specifically around energy generation and transmission. So I think it's sort of, I would say it's dependent on the mechanics of the site. What does the local labor market and local industry look like? If there's already some activity going on in that particular sector that you can maybe piggyback off of. There's already companies doing something in those spaces, in those areas. There's some natural synergies versus something that would be a little bit more purely new. That's going to be harder to do. So I think that's part of it, and then also just the geography. If you need wide open spaces, that lends you to a little bit more remote, the more remote Freedom City sites. If you need sort of less physical space, then I think closer to existing urban area sites are a good option.
So Greg, if I can pose on you one more time. So you've got 50 million square feet of commercial space, is that it? What's your view? You're basically at ground zero now. I don't know what commitments you have, but are you trying to attract some industry? Is this commercial, office space? Is obviously some's retail, but are there factories? What's the sort of the lay of the land as this builds out?
Well, ultimately with, Teravalis will be a city of 300,000 people, so it'll have everything. I mean, 300,000 people is probably larger than the city of Irvine, California, one of the planned communities that was mentioned earlier. So it'll be some of everything, and it'll take time. The houses will come first, but we can envision energy-related industry. We can envision, there's certainly in the Phoenix metro, there's been a lot in the semiconductor industry. So there's warehouse and distribution makes a lot of sense. Ultimately, we're a little ways off the 10 freeway. The I-11 is planned to connect Mexico all the way up to Las Vegas. So as that comes along, that'll be a driver as well. But it really will be everything. So it's a long-term effort to recruit sort of major industries, but it's something that we are always working on because it's essential to have a city. You can't just build 300,000 or 100,000 homes without jobs. So
yeah, they tried that in Florida back in the 70s, 60s, and 70s. It's called Port Charlotte on the Gulf Coast, and they literally platted hundreds of thousands of lots, and they didn't plan for schools or much commercial or anything. And the lots were about 40 feet by 80 feet, and they put in the canals and the roads, and they're still trying to get those lots to have houses on them 40 years later. So you have to plan, an entire community and make sure that you have all of that planned for, and there's land for all of that. So you have one more question back here.
Yeah, I've actually got two questions, one for Arthur and one for Jeff. So Arthur, with the data that you're pulling and the estimates, it seems as though some of those are based on an assumption around the future of work, right? We see that especially the further out parcels, right? The ones that are closer in I commend you guys on making sure that those are going to be connected to the urban core to some degree. But especially when you're talking 5 miles out from the periphery of the current metro area, those are really probably going to be dependent on future workers being able to telework and whatnot. Especially, I used to live in Oregon, so Bend used to be a place where you had a lot of Microsoft alumni kind of go there because they could work remotely or those types of jobs. So can you speak a little bit to some of those, how you foresee this interacting with the future of work or the underlying assumptions there? And then Jeff, digging a little deeper on the last question, I think it's great opening up land and providing freedom for folks to do what they want. As soon as you start talking about the government kind of giving specific waivers to industries, I inherently get a little cautious. And I'm wondering specifically how you foresee avoiding cronyism, monopsony power, kind of that Amazon HQ effect, or even worst case scenario, if you have have one specific industry in that area, how do you avoid the Detroit effect, where suddenly competition drives that company out of business or that industry transforms in a different way?
I'll deal with the first question. Jeff's talked a little bit about the future of work, but I question the premise a little bit. We're not really in the business of projecting the future of work. What we do look at for the Freedom City locations, and I'll leave Home Sweet Home aside for the second because those are kind of near developments that already exist. There's proof of concept there. For Freedom Cities, when we do the rankings, we look at the current status of work and the amount of jobs that are within 10 miles of the given site for our kind of preliminary rank of the Freedom Cities. We do limit them to metros, so in some sense, that's an assumption that the future of work is going to be relatively close to the current of work. But I don't think we want to prescribe the industry or the employment of these freedom effects in the future. We want to leave it to the people who are on the ground to negotiate the paths that are best for them and to the markets that are involved. The same way as we do with housing densities, where we're trying to take a light touch approach, to use one of Ed's phrases, on what types of homes will be built, because the people who are stakeholders on the ground will know better than we do.
Yeah, and on the second question, so yeah, your point is well taken, and I think this is why, in the context of okay, what kind of incentive structures do we want to create to try to attract industries? I think in general we should have a preference for things that are sort of open-ended, in that they are something that could apply to any company that's doing business in the space. So not here's a specific package for you, Amazon, something like that. But something that is more general and open in nature, such that if you are in this industry and this framework would benefit your business in some way, then maybe it would make more sense for you to potentially relocate there. Because right, I agree. Once you start getting into some of these fiscal incentive packages, things like that, it can get messy and really quickly. So that's one thing, and then two, the other point about the potential downfalls of sort of targeting a specific industry. I think that's another good point, and I think that's why, again, I think you can go the single industry route if it makes sense, but that's why I think sort of if a site is large enough, like some of these sites that Arthur's identified, I think that's one. I think that's good reason to focus on targeting multiple sectors. But then I think two, also to the extent that you can sort of build out supply chains for some of those initial anchor tenants who could potentially serve those industries, but could serve others that are not part of that target as well, or maybe who are already established within the, say, whatever metro area you're in, suppliers who would feed into these industries that come in if they're already doing business in that metro area. That strikes me as a way that would be a little bit more resilient to potential shocks. So it's not just purely creating a new sort of supply chain out of thin air, but being strategic about what you try to do where, based on what industry or what talent pools already exist in that space. So I don't think there's like a perfect way around these problems. Like it's always going to be, I think, a possibility. But I do think you can design the incentive structures in such a way that tries to minimize, if not fully deflate those risks.
So we're going to end this panel. We're going to move into the last panel, which will have another period for Q&A. And again, we can always answer any questions. So thank this panel, please. Pretty close on schedule. So I've asked Tobias to go through sort of some analysis and of the proposal that was written about by Secretaries Burgum and Turner from Interior and HUD that was in the Wall Street Journal earlier this week, which is a very different, sort of vision than what we've laid out here. But they're not necessarily completely inconsistent, but it's a very different approach. As I mentioned earlier, the op-ed makes no mention of the private sector, no mention of the private market doing things, no mention of selling land to private developers. It talks about affordable housing, which to me means capital A, affordable housing. It talks about transferring land, leasing land to cities and to nonprofits, which again is a very different vision than what we're talking about here, which is no surprise. Our middle name is enterprise. It isn't government. And HUD's middle name, seems to be more government, obviously, because it's a part of the government. So with that, Tobias, if you can sort of give us some oversight or insight into what was proposed.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. So yeah, this was a op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, appeared on Monday, I believe, from HUD Secretary Scott Turner and Interior Secretary Doug Burgum, where they talked about releasing some of this federal land, and they were creating a partnership where they were going to do it jointly. And initially we read the headline, I was like, oh, fantastic. But then once we started reading the op-ed, it became a little bit, got a little bit of a different perception, for the reason that, as Ed said, we generally like market approaches that are from the bottoms up. The approach that was outlined in the op-ed seemed to us more top-down and government heavy. And these approaches in the past have not had the best success rate. And we've pointed towards affordable housing, particularly capital A and capital H affordable housing, that this really seemed to be tilting towards. And as Ed said, the private sector was not mentioned, but it mentioned state housing finance agencies, it mentioned nonprofits, and it mentioned local governments. And so this all kind of to us suggests that the approach is more geared towards subsidies. And the low-income housing tax credit, we had an event here, I believe last year, where we highlighted some of the problems with the low-income housing tax credit, and also a proposed middle-income housing tax credit, where we went through in great detail the issues. And the issues we call the 5 Cs. The one being costly. California now routinely spends over $1 million for a LIHTC unit. It is very complex. I think the pages in the codes are 1,000 pages, I think Chris Edwards mentioned from Cato Institute. And because it's very complex, it's only being handled by a small group, a cartel of these small scale LIHTC developers that can put up with the complexity. There's also seems to be quite a lot of corruption involved with the low-income housing tax credit. Now, if you Google corruption, low-income housing tax credit, you find some stories. And foremost, there's also a lot of crowding out, meaning that there are studies that show that the private sector would be building the same amount of housing, except that the money is given away to low-income housing tax credit and builders. And kind of we're spending money versus when the private sector could be doing it. And Ed, you tried to do a development down in Florida, where you put up your own money and went through the zoning approach, went through the zoning. The impact fees were the stumbling block, because the city said, look, you're going to be building, how many units were you going to be building?
500.
500 units. That's great, but we have a low-income housing tax credit here that we're going to be building 200 units. But they're going to be paying the full price, versus you are asking for a little bit of a rebate here. And it is, and they ended up with 300 fewer housing units, which it's significant. And the same with inclusionary zoning. The op-ed mentioned a lot of affordability goals. And when we looked at Seattle, Ed mentioned the study earlier that we did on Seattle's upzoning. It was going great. 20,000 townhomes got built over the last 25 years. But then once they started getting creative and the council voted on an inclusionary zoning mandate that required developers to set aside a certain number of units for for low-income people, we found that permits started dropping off a cliff. They started dropping by 80% over just a year. Over the span of a year, permits dropped 80%. And with these mandates, oftentimes the unseen piece is what's not analyzed. And the unseen piece is that they stopped building thousands of townhomes. Yes, they got maybe 100 inclusionary zoning housing units, but they lost thousands of units that no longer get built. So there were people at the council and also at HUD that pointed towards this policy as a smashing success. But there was a lot of unseen stuff that happened that did not get reported on. Ed also mentioned earlier on the outset the Southern Nevada Public Land Management Act of 1998. Initially, they were actually disposing of land. I think it was 74,000 acres that were being made available from the federal government to be disposed of. But over time, by 2012, they stopped disposing land. And since then, it's only been a trickle. And the reasons, we're still looking into the reasons for why that happened. But as a result, Las Vegas had the highest home price appreciation over the time period out of all the metros that we've been studying. And so I think going through this approach that's very much modeled along this Southern Nevada Public Land Management Act, it's going to slow down it's going to slow down the momentum, and it's not going to be enough. And it's also not going to generate any revenue, because if you're working with affordable housing developers, the land is generally given away for free or at a very notional amount. And to the extent that the government has a revenue problem, and I think a $2 trillion deficit, I think kind of we should be looking at selling that land rather than giving it away. And particularly if we increase the density of the land being built on, we can actually build a lot more housing in it that way. And the missing piece then is the filtering aspect, where people oftentimes forget about the filtering aspect. If you're building a lot of housing in the middle for the broad masses, all the housing is going to filter down, and you're going to be providing housing for lower income people. And you don't need to build new housing for lower income people if you're building market rate housing for the broad masses. And we see that in the car market, where we're building some very expensive cars, but we're building plenty of cars for the middle class, the Toyota Hyundais, the Civics, the Honda, all the Camrys and Toyota Civics, all those cars that are, people are buying these newer cars, they're selling their older cars, but no one is proposing tax credit for lower income, for car manufacturers to sell to lower income people. So if it works in cars, why can it not work in housing? And so the alternative, of course, being that this bottoms-up market-driven approach, kind of the op-ed also called for a study, a task force, and a study from HUD to identify these areas. Well, we've seen it from Arthur just a little while ago. There's a lot of legwork that we've already done that HUD and the Department of Interior could be building on, and we should use that as a starting point to save time. I think that's kind of my quick take on this op-ed. I'm gonna be collecting more of those thoughts in an op-ed eventually, but.
Thank you, Tobias. So again, to reiterate, this housing success sequence is very straightforward. It is a bottoms-up approach. So we're not picking exactly, we're not saying this many houses are going to build exactly here. What we're saying is there's BLM land that at a certain density could lead to the development of a certain number of houses in this location. We don't know whether there are builders that are going to want to build there, but we assume that if the land's made available and there is demand, they are going to want to take advantage of that. Or as I was mentioned earlier, there may be other land across the street or a mile away that all of a sudden comes on the market because this land is made available, and maybe it gets developed not next year, but the year after, because other land comes onto the market. That's a market-based approach. That's what happens in free markets all day long. The HUD approach that was described in this op-ed is a top-down. HUD is going to pick places of where the housing is going to be. Well, how in the world is HUD going to do that? Nobody, the price signal is the best signal that people have come up with of where to do things. It's based on price. And that's what the free market does all day long in terms of where it puts resources and puts capital. HUD is not particularly good track record in that. And I've written a lot about all these acts that have been passed by Congress. I counted up 40 of them from 1930-something to the year 2000, roughly, give or take. And if those had worked the way they had promised, we wouldn't be having conferences on housing supply shortfalls. We'd be awash in housing, but they didn't work. And these acts are become legend. There's the 1949, I think it is, Housing Act that basically said the future is in high-rise public housing. Well, most of that high-rise public housing has been imploded, blown up. That was built as a result of that act. There is what was known as the Urban Renewal Act, which became known as the Urban Removal Act. There's the UDAG, the Urban Development Grants Act. There's Model Cities, which has got its whole series of disasters that in fact, there's a museum in New Haven, which was the original model cities. And there's a whole museum at Yale University talking about the disaster that Model Cities, small m, small c, because it was the original one, it ended up in New Haven. New Haven hasn't recovered from Model Cities. There's Tobias mentioned LIHTC and all the problems with that. There's all the other, alphabet soup programs that the federal government has had. And here they're trying to pick winners and losers, and they just don't have a very good track record at it because it's top down. We actually looked at Philadelphia, where the city tried to pick winners and losers through a $300 million bond issue in 2000 called the Neighborhood Transformation Initiative. They were going to transform neighborhoods. It was a top-down selection, a political selection process. There was a lot of things that went on, the complexity and things, and it didn't accomplish all that much. At the same time, they implemented a tax abatement for new construction on vacant lots, which Philadelphia was awash in vacant lots in 2000. They built tens and tens of thousands of homes, lots and lots on townhome lots. It was bottoms up. It was by right. The zoning was already in place. The regulations were KISS regulations, and they got tens of thousands of housing units. You didn't have to ask anybody's permission to do it. You just built the new structure on the vacant lot. You walked in to the tax office and said, hey, I now have an improved lot. You don't charge me anything for the next 10 years on the improvement. That's the way it was by right. They didn't have to ask any alderman's permission. They didn't have to get any approval by anybody. It just was by right. And so what we're saying is, look, we've identified the land. The market can decide. This is a bidding process. If nobody bids for the land, or they bid at a very low price, which indicates there might not be a lot of demand, well, somebody may get it at a low price and can build the housing. If nobody bids for it, nobody bids for it. That's very different than a forced feeding process, which is the way HUD tends to do things. So with that, we're going to wrap up. And so I want to turn to Mackenzie to give some thoughts about the day and where we go from here.
Yes, as Michael Burkentine said, everyone knows someone who is struggling with the housing affordability crisis. And this is a policy failure. And so there's not going to be a policy solution that comes from HUD. This is going to be a market-driven solution. If anything from today, there's that takeaway. There's an innovative solution with Homesteading 2.0, a promising solution. 2.0, it's a promising solution. And so if we can, like many of the conversations and what the chamber is specifically doing, if we can get our localities on board, if we can get HUD on board with the right angle, not from the subsidy point of view, but letting the private sector fill in the gap, we can solve this housing crisis. We can add 10 million or 3 million homes over the next 10 years. And with the potential of Freedom Cities, there is a lot of business and economic development that can happen across the nation. Our nation needs this. And so the takeaway is we're doing all we can to socialize this with our state and local chambers to get localities on board and see this problem solved.
Thank you. So we'll take some questions. We have one question. Do you see any future for the LIHTC program? That has two components. One is, will Congress expand it? And the answer probably is, unfortunately, yes. Congress loves the program. Congress loves giving out money. As long as they have ink, they'll keep spending, right? So Congress loves it. Why does Congress love it? Because the money gets distributed per capita. Every representative and every senator gets an allocation. And there's some safe harbors for small states, but in general, it's based on a per capita. So you get money no matter what. The idea is you don't turn down free money because it's free money. And so there's a lot of bipartisan support for LIHTC. The question then is, should there be bipartisan support for LIHTC? And the answer, Tobias, you want to repeat the 5 C's?
Sure. Well, the first one is costly. In California, $1 million routinely. I think across the nation, it's about $500,000. It's complex, literally this thick, the handbook. It caters to a cartel. And there's corruption involved, and it crowds out the private sector, almost 1-for-1. And if that's the case, why are we doing this? But there's also another dirty little secret with LIHTC, which is that half of the money that gets spent is only used to rehab existing housing. So it's not even used to add to the housing supply. It's just used to maintain the existing housing stock. So yeah, it has a couple of problems.
Yeah, the other dirty little secret, notwithstanding all the front end money that goes in to make the development cost virtually zero, half of the people in LIHTC developments get monthly rent supplements to pay their rent, because the rent is so high that they can't afford it without cash from the government, and about 80 to 90% of those rental payments come from the federal government. So, I mean, this is a program that is gold-plated top to bottom on the development side and gold-plated top to bottom on the operational side. And the other thing we found was that a very high percentage of the only data we had was for California. Virtually everyone that's done in California pays no taxes, no property taxes. So they have tax abatement, which is another reason why it crowds out other development. The other developments, the private developments, don't have that. They have to pay property taxes. But if you do LIHTC development in California, you don't pay property taxes.
And I would add, members of Congress want to win, and this is a win back home. And Homesteading 2.0 is a win. So if this is a solution that would actually work and provide a win for members. And it's another reason that pushing this forward matters so much.
Correct. Questions? We had, yep, Joe?
Just another anecdote. I like the lottery system. My first townhouse in Arlington in 1978, it was the first, Wingate won the first 300-unit development built in the county. It was the lottery, and it was a demand type thing, and it worked. Again, I'm impressed with the Homesteading 2.0, albeit it's just for the western states. I'm looking at the East Coast, where we also have an affordable problem. And I would urge you all to continue doing advocacy on the starter home, the small lots, change the communications. It's not missing middle, it's starter home housing. Communities, and I'm saying this because I'm also on the Arlington Housing Commission, at the local level, they need help. And the federal government's not going to be the help, but basically we need success stories out there, and amplifying what's happening in San Antonio, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm looking in the chamber could also do that. So modeling success stories will help the local communities do what you're trying to do here with the western states. Thank you.
Yes, we're working very closely with AEI to provide data and policy solutions for 16,000 different states, metros, and cities, and with our state and local chambers to provide these solutions.
Yes, and Arthur doesn't know this yet, but we do have all the public records, and I was just looking at some maps that the Bureau of Labor excuse me, Bureau of Land Management came out with, and they had in Las Vegas, land that was owned by the state, land that was owned by the city, color-coded. And we have a lot of data in our public records data for the whole country, all 3,000 counties. And we're going to sort of start looking around at that at some point. We're really focused on Homesteading 2.0, but it could be expanded both to other federal land that isn't part of the BLM land, but also other land, state and local land. Texas, I believe, has a lot of land. New Mexico, when I was there at the governor's office last week, they were talking about New Mexico has a lot of land that's owned by the state. And so, again, we can go through the same type of triage process that we've done for the BLM land. We can do that for this land owned. And once this process is in place, you have the process in place and the lottery process in place, then again, as was mentioned earlier, you could bring in other types of land into it. And that land, by definition, is not going to be isolated to the western third of the country as this is, just because it's going to be all over, much more all over the country. Other questions? Yes, sir. Ken.
This is excellent disruptor, and we're always looking for those. Housing has not had many disruptors as other parts of the economy have. And so particularly in terms of partnering and finding champions, and the question I wanted to ask with the previous panel still pertains here in suggesting in terms of the free market and free economic zones that it isn't an all one size fits all. And because OCC and HUD and Fannie Mae started this conversation in Trump 1, it's going to happen again with SEC in terms of and OCC in terms of financing these kinds of operations, extremely high level. So I would suggest that you might think about some of the crypto billionaires and also the Trump crypto fund that he has suggested, and not make that your entire pitch, obviously, but that as we all have to do in developing land, you find 26 ways, 26 sources of finance and packaging your development. And it may be that one of those developments would be that free market zone that would have blockchaining and crypto in it.
So we actually, I think I mentioned this earlier, but I want to repeat it. We've established a working group that's going to have periodic Zoom meetings on Homesteading 2.0. The first Zoom call is next Tuesday, March 25th at 1 p.m. If you if you email me or Amanda Tobias and just say, hey, can you send me the link? We'll send you the link, and we'll be having those Zoom meetings periodically. We want to build both awareness, knowledge about this, talk through the issues, and build support for it through these calls. And so again, the next one is next Tuesday, March 25th at 1 p.m. Eastern time. And let me see, there was one other thing that I was going to mention. Well, it's lost me. So any last question? Otherwise, we will adjourn a few minutes early. Any other questions? I don't think we have any more. Nope. We are ready to close. Thank you all for your attention and attendance.